Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of the Huki and Flamia Show.
Welcome, everybody. We're so stoked to be here.
We are indeed stoked because we have a special guest today.
Very special guest, very interesting conversations. You care to go into his credentials?
Yes, so this week's guest is Dr. Martin Ball. Martin Ball is a friend. Um, he's a musician, a non-dual and theogenic educator, an author, artist and integration specialist. He's best known for his work with 5-Meo DMT, but not limited specifically just to that specific conversation. But that is kind of the centerpiece of his work.
And he's also just a cool dude, just a real legend.
Yeah,
Very, very good time. A very good time was had during this conversation.
for sure. He's a really cool guy, and he doesn't pull any punches. He says things how he sees them, and I definitely appreciate that about him.
Yeah, he's a fun guy to push back on. I tried to give him a little pushback during this convo. It was an interesting take on things he had.
Yeah, for sure. So without further ado, we give you
Martin Ball, enjoy.
yes. Enjoy. Welcome to the show, Martin. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me, Helgi. Nice to see you.
Yeah. I guess I just want to start off by asking you, like, how are you doing? How's the family? How's life in Ashland, Oregon?
Oh, what a complex question. You think that'd be simple? So many layers to answer that. The first is I had a carbon monoxide alarm go off at like 5 a.m. in the morning last night. The battery was low, and so it's like chirp, chirp, chirp. And so I get up at like 5 a.m. and I was like, what the fuck is that? Like, where is that? And I thought it was the smoke alarm up on the ceiling, and it's like way up high. So I had to like get out this folding table. Oh, there's there's Moxie. She sees a deer. I don't know if you guys can hear her barking, but she's barking like mad because a deer is walking past the back fence there.
Z-
Hold on,
z-
Moxie. Hey.
It doesn't come through.
Zoom's compression is doing its thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's just she's like barking in my ear. Um, anyway, so I try and like I get the smoke alarm off, and then I still hearing this cheep. And I was like, what's cheeping? What's doing that? And like, oh, it's the carbon monoxide alarm, like all the way down there. So I had to take that out and take the battery out. And then I couldn't get to sleep after that. So I'm like a little like, "Ugh," this morning. So that's like the personal question. Family is good. We did an amazing hike yesterday. So we are located in Southern Oregon, and we went to Crater Lake, which is a national park here in Oregon. If you've never been to Crater Lake, you got to go to Crater Lake. I mean, it's like a bucket list kind of place. And I'd read online that there is a hike that we've never taken down from the rim down to the water of Crater Lake. And I read online that on November 1st, the trail is going to be closed, and then there's going to be 3 years of maintenance on this trail. And so it's be another
You
3 years
just
before you can do it. So I was like,
You
hey, we
caught
got
it.
to go do this.
you
So
just you
we drove,
just made it.
yeah, so we drove out to Crater Lake yesterday, and it's 45 degrees. I mean, it's like not a warm day, but it was nice, kind of partly cloudy and sunny. And there's people like leaping off the rocks into the water, which is like 50 degrees. I'm like, well, I wouldn't go swimming right now, but there's a bunch of people down there swimming, I guess. I mean, it's like Oregonians. And one of the things I love about national parks in the United States is that whenever you go, there are always like so many people from all around the world. So there's all these different languages being spoken. I mean, yesterday I think I heard like Hindi, Chinese, Japanese, German, French, Spanish. And it's one of these things that I kind of reflect on about how, a lot of people from around the world, they actually don't want to come to the United States right now because then this gets into the larger question of like,
Hmm.
what the fuck is going on here?
Yeah.
And we are very rapidly descending into a fascist state. And foreigners are largely not welcome here right now. And for understandable reasons, a lot of them don't want to come. So That's my multi-layered answer to the question, like, how you doing? How's the family? What's going on?
How's the family, as in the entire nation that you
Yeah,
identify with? how's
yeah.
the how's the fam
Stressed out,
how's
honestly,
the
stressed
U.S.
out.
tribe? Yeah, I I
Yeah.
I can see that, man. It's funny that you mentioned that the Crater Lake's going to be closed because I'm actually coming over to the U.S. for the first time in my life on the 22nd of October. Uh,
Yeah.
but
Where are you gonna go?
I am going to Arizona and California, so I won't make it. I'm afraid. But yeah.
Well, there's still lots of cool stuff to see in Arizona and California. And actually, just one more thing I'll mention about the national parks. So right now, the federal government is shut down because our amazing deal maker of a president can't seem to make a deal to keep the government open. And so, in going to the national park yesterday, usually you have to pay to get in. Like this is money making for the United States, but nobody's working at the parks right now because the government is shut down. So that means it's just open. You just drive in. You don't have to pay any money. And it's weird. It's because national parks is something that I am more than happy to pay for because I believe in national parks. I think that they are an incredible resource and add value to our lives and are important to protect. And so I'm happy to pay for them. And I wish there had been somebody there to take our money to get into the national
Hmm.
park.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something that's a topic me and Helgi can certainly relate to, having to pay for national parks. Although I find it annoying most of the time in Iceland. We're both from Iceland,
Yeah.
for the listeners who don't know. Uh, how, tourism has been on the rise and is now I believe it's the number one industry in the Icelandic economy and the contributors to the GDP right now, even more than the fish nowadays. And you get like bombarded with ads on the flight back home and it's so annoying. You get treated like all the other tourists coming over with the Iceland airplane. Um, and then you got to pay for all the stuff as well. It used to be free when I was younger. It's like, ah, damn, I can't. I just wish I could. And another point on national parks. This is kind of random, but I thought of this because you said it. Um, should a country really be entitled to making money off its nature in that sense? Because it's not like a theme park. It's not like where you have to invest capital to build a theme park and then it's like fair game. You deserve to get whatever comes in from this. It's more like just happened to be there. Mother Nature came up with the theme park and we're charging for it.
Yeah. Well, in the United States, the national parks are incredibly popular. And so they receive a huge influx of people, particularly during like the summer months. So millions and millions of people go to these parks. And if you think about all the traffic, all the trash, just even the restroom facilities, I mean, that's something that going to like Crater Lake yesterday, we didn't know if the restrooms were even going to be open or not because there's
Sure.
nobody there to work them. There's nobody there to clean them. So it
Yes,
actually,
paying the workers is a different conversation than, taking a tax from what the workers get. Yeah.
yeah. So paying for the upkeep of the park, it's a lot. And the parks also are very, very large, many of them. So they need funds. And it'd be one thing to say like, hey, all of this is paid for by the government through our taxes. But just the money allocation has just not been there historically. So this is how the parks are able to handle these huge numbers of people. And again, with our national parks, it's pretty much always been open to the world. And it was the United States that actually started the entire idea of let's make a national park. I believe that was Roosevelt, and I think maybe it was Yosemite, which was the first one. Could be wrong on that. But it's kind of started that idea of these are places that we want to protect and that we're not going to develop for other purposes. And then, how do we fund it? How do we pay for it? And I could definitely feel like if it had always been free, then suddenly you're paying for it. Like that's a big shift. Like I grew up in California. Okay, we're talking about. I don't know if this is what you wanted to talk about today, but you got me started. So
We're,
like,
We're happy to dive into
we're
anything,
okay,
just
so it's interesting. Why not?
okay, fair game. So what I was gonna say is that I grew up in California, and California has a really robust state-run university and college system. So there's the UC system, and then there's the Cal State system. Um, Now, this is before my time. It used to be the case that if you were a California resident, you could go to these schools for free, and that via the tax base in California, that of course the professors would get paid, the university would get paid, but as a California resident, you did not have to pay, and that was something that the state provided for you. If you wanted to get a university education, it's paid for. But that is long since gone.
I thought so,
And
yeah.
yeah, so now, I mean, if you're a resident of a state, it's typical that you pay less than you would if you were coming from out of state, but it's definitely not free. So my son, Ethan, my 18-year-old son down in Southern California, he just started UC Santa Barbara just a few weeks ago. And I gotta say, I was pretty shocked by the very first bill that came in. It's like, damn, man, I gotta be working more because this is so far from free. And, you know, it's not that I expected it to be free or anything, but the amount that I'm paying just for his very first term at school was like, even from when I went to college, you know, 25, 30 years ago, um, the amount that I'm paying for him to go to UCSB is equivalent to me having gone to a private school when I was an undergrad. And so I was just kind of like, wow. Yeah, it's definitely, it's time to work more.
This is well, this is a Helge, do you have anything you want to shoot in at this point? Or do you I just had an interesting thought. We can just keep going wherever this goes.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely do want to go into the more, let's say, Martin Ball centric topics. What Martin is more known for, but I also enjoy, the lighthearted nature of just flowing with it at the same time. So, feel free to go ahead with whatever comes to mind.
Well, what came to mind just now is that I forgot to ask Martin, for our listeners. You've been asked this a million times before, probably by a million other podcast hosts, but can you give us like a 30-second to 1 minute summary of your background for those who are not familiar?
Oh man, I don't think so. I don't think I could do it in 30 seconds to a minute.
However fast you
Okay,
can.
so I have kind of a cheeky way of going about it. So I'm gonna request that you guys indulge me. So the first answer that I like to give is like when people ask me, well, who are you? I say, well, I'm a localized embodiment of the one universal consciousness and being that is everyone and everything, that is identified with the personality structure that is known as the person Martin W. Ball that inhabits this particular human vehicle. So that's my non-dual answer. And then at the
Uh-huh.
practical level of like, well, like the historical level of who is this guy? Um, I'm a dude who lives in Southern Oregon. And I am best known for my work in 5-Meo DMT and non-duality. I have been an active participant in the quote unquote psychedelic renaissance and movement for, man, over 20 years now. And I come from California, currently live in Southern Oregon. I went through school and received my master's and PhD in religious studies, and been working as an independent author and publisher. I've produced a lot of books, and I've also been host of the Entheogenic Evolution podcast since January of 2008. And I do like to say that I'm probably one of the longest running podcasters in the world at this point. And
Certainly.
these days, I work with Mindscape Psychedelic Institute to help train people to facilitate 5-MeO DMT and also offer integration services. And I work as a professional integration coach to help people integrate their psychedelic experience from what I describe as a non-dual and energetic perspective. And I specialize in 5-MeO DMT, but I'm not limited to that. And also one of my claim to fames is I am the dude that started calling 5-MeO DMT the God molecule. And I often don't get credit for that. It gets attributed to other people, but that was me. And I've been a leading voice around the subject of 5-MeO DMT since I first encountered it in uh, January of 2008. So that's me in just a nutshell, I guess.
And I mean, the both of us have so many questions. For context for our listeners, Helge is a lot more familiar with Martin. They've been buddies for years now, and I'm kind of coming in fresh. So I might ask you some questions, Martin, that Helgi knows the answers to already.
Yeah, and
But
I
it's gonna be
thought that
fun.
could be an interesting setup because, having someone who's coming from a fresh perspective, similar to probably many people who will be listening, and somebody who's familiar with your work. Um,
Although, to be clear, I did do my homework, so I'm not coming in entirely clueless, and I have some questions that I prepared in advance. I'd be very interested to ask, but I think it would be more appropriate if you start this off, Helgi, with one of yours.
I mean, I think it's probably good just to clarify for the listeners what 5-MeO DMT is. A lot of people these days know DMT. It's been in vogue for some time now, and it's almost become a part of uh, mainstream. You know, a lot of people just in day to day life know what DMT is, but most people have never heard of 5-MeO DMT, and they are quite significantly different, even though their names sound similar. So I think it's important
Including
to.
me, not the least experienced psychonaut of the world. I did not know there was a distinction. So yeah.
Right. So I think it's good to just start off like clarifying what is 5-MeO and how does it differ from DMT.
Sure. Let's get into it. So, what we're talking about here are psychedelic compounds that are within the tryptamine class or family. So, a tryptamine has a basic molecular structure. I'm not a chemist, so I'm not going to get into all the little nifty details, but it's a basic geometric arrangement of molecules that creates a tryptamine. And then a tryptamine can have certain things added to it or subtracted so that, the way that chemicals work, molecules work, is that different elements can bond at different places depending on how those interactions can take place with the exchange of electrons and all the rest of that kind of stuff. So anyway, within the tryptamine family, one of the things I always like to highlight is that our neurotransmitters in the mammalian body are also tryptamine. So when we talk about serotonin, that is a tryptamine. Then we have melatonin, that is also a tryptamine. So tryptamines are endemic to mammalian neurophysiology. And we also have these two, quote, psychedelic tryptamines that mammals also produce inside their bodies. And one is DMT and the other is 5-MeO DMT. So DMT is dimethyltryptamine. That's what the DMT stands for. And 5-MeO DMT is 5-methoxy dimethyltryptamine. And from a chemical standpoint, what that means is that there is what is called a methoxylated group that is attached to the 5 position of the basic DMT molecule. Then branching out further into the tryptamine psychedelic family, we also have 4-HO DMT. This is what is known as psilocybin. This is what we find in, quote, magic mushrooms. So that has a hydroxy group that is attached to the 4 position of the DMT molecule. Okay, so that's 4-HO DMT.
Okay, wait. Can I enter just for a second?
Sure.
So these are all essentially derivatives, or not derivatives, that's not quite the right word, but this is basically all the psychedelics you just mentioned at least are DMT, the basic DMT molecule, which is also known as crystal DMT, I
And
guess.
DMT.
NN-DMT is the technical term. And then
Yeah,
you
so
add something onto that and it becomes something else. You're definitely blowing my mind with that just to begin with. I did not know.
yeah, so the DMT itself is kind of like the base molecule, and you can add different chemical compounds to it at different positions, and then you get this wide variety. And then you can also take the DMT itself and you can alter that structure so that it's no longer DMT, but it might be MEP or DIPT or MIPT. So when we're dealing with psychedelic compounds, we've got a wide collection of letters and numbers. And what all those letters and numbers are referring to is the basic chemical structure of that molecule. And at this point in time, there's a large variety of purely synthetic DMT or tryptamine molecules that have been created by scientists in a lab,
So
which do
LSD is
not.
one of those. right?
Yeah, so
Mm.
LSD, it's a bit more complicated because LSD does have the basic tryptamine molecule, and then it's got a bunch of other stuff on it. So it's a rather complicated molecule, but also ibogaine also is a tryptamine,
Was not
and that's
aware of that.
probably the most complex. It's got, I mean, if you look at the picture of the molecule, it's got like all these bells and whistles. It's got lots of stuff on there, but because these are all within the tryptamine family, what that means is that these different variations on this basic structure are able to interact with our neurobiology, meaning that they attach to different neuroreceptors on the brain. And there's a little bit of metaphysics in a sense, well, not necessarily, but these are in their pure form, these are all little crystalline structures that chemicals naturally organize themselves into crystalline shapes. This is how matter organizes itself. So, what we're doing when we're working with these different tryptamines is that we're basically introducing these little crystalline structures into our neurobiology, and they are attaching to our neuroreceptors, and that they then alter the way that energy flows through the neurological system. So I like to say that every psychedelic has its own unique energetic signature, in a sense, where it's going to impact our perception and experience of energy in different and unique ways. And by that, I always like to point out that our thoughts literally are energies. I mean, it's electromagnetic energy like running around our brain. So our thoughts are energy. So in other words, we take a psychedelic, we think differently, we think different thoughts, we have different ways of relating information. And then our emotions, these are all also forms of energy, so that we encounter our emotional state in an altered or amplified or enhanced way. And then our sense organs are all about processing energy. Our eyes process light waves, which are energy. Our ears process sound waves, which are energy. Our bodies process different levels of energy. This is hard, this is soft, this is cold, this is warm, this is rough, this is smooth, this feels good, this feels bad, right? These are all different energies. So as we consume these different psychedelics, it alters the way that we are able to experience, process, perceive, and understand our own energetic nature. So getting back to the question, sorry, I'm rambling and I'm going fast because I'm trying to get a lot of information out. DMT, again, is a base psychedelic molecule, and that it can be configured in multiple different ways. And also, DMT is something that is widely produced within a variety of different plants around the world. It can be extracted, or it can be combined with a monoamine oxidase inhibitors, such as the ayahuasca vine, and then you get the ayahuasca brew or drink. And if you get a plant extract of DMT, you can smoke or vaporize that and have a very rapid onset psychedelic experience, which tends to be overwhelmingly visual in nature. But then when we get to 5-MeO DMT, we have something that is actually many orders of magnitude stronger than DMT itself. And it interacts with our neurobiology in a very different way. So that DMT is much more targeted in terms of what receptor sites it hits, whereas 5-MeO is more broad. And it tends not to be predominantly visual, whereas DMT tends to be predominantly very, very visual in nature in terms of psychedelic presentation. 5-MeO is not predominantly visual. And what it's best known for is being extremely energetically powerful to the degree that it actually overrides the energetic structures of the human ego. And this is a place of comparison that I always like to highlight, that the majority of psychedelics and psychedelic experiences alter the ego, so it alters someone's subjective sense of self, but most psychedelics do not actually override the ego. So the ego is still present throughout the experience, whereas 5-MeO DMT has a reputation for holding the potential to completely override the ego within a few seconds of having consumed it. So it then produces what we call a, quote, ego death experience, where the person feels that they are dying and that their ego and identity is dissolving apart. But then what remains on the other side of that threshold is this experience of the complete unitary nature of being. And for many people, just in common language, the way that they would describe it was, I died and I merged with God. And then
Yeah.
eventually my ego came back and I was reborn, or I woke up, or I regained consciousness. So it's a very different and unique kind of experience. And again, it's not something that happens on most psychedelics. And even now that we are more well versed in 5-MeO DMT, that we can pretty effectively say that what most people describe as an ego death experience on psychedelics doesn't really qualify as an ego death experience. So, for example, with DMT, it's common for people to say, yeah, I thought I died and then I was floating around in heaven with all these angels, and then some aliens came by and a spaceship, flew in, and I was like, hey, cool, check it out. I'm going to go back to Earth. And people say, yeah, that was an ego death experience. It's not an ego death experience. It's an ego translation experience. But the ego is still there because people say, well, I was in heaven with these other beings or these aliens or whatever. But the
Yes.
very fact that they're using that language to reference their own perspective shows that that's still an ego that's speaking. It's highly altered, doesn't know where it is, but it's altered. Whereas 5-MeO DMT obliterates the ego,
Yeah.
and then
So
it comes back.
to
Yeah.
get really specific with the definition of the term ego, when you use it, you mean just the pure sense of subject and object relationship in reality, as opposed to oneness. Correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a good way of parsing it. I do like to be specific, where I always do say that, look, the ego itself, like we ask, what is the ego? First of all, it's a collection of patterns of energy with which we have identified over the course of our lives. So these patterns of energy are ways that we think, ways that we act, ways that we express ourselves, ways that we embody ourselves, and ways that we interact with what we perceive as being not ourselves, and at this subject object level. And that the ego is also lots of ingrained patterns about ways we think of ourselves, where we say, oh, I'm not good enough, or I should be this way, or I should be that way, so that these patterns of energy with which we've identified are not necessarily in alignment with what I would describe as our authentic energy, because we've been conditioned through family, society, culture, politics, religion, all the rest of that. And that another aspect of the ego that I always like to highlight, because a lot of people tend to think of the ego as merely my sense of myself, the identity that I have as myself. But I like to say that actually what the ego is the interface between what we characterize as the self on this end, but the ego also creates this sense of objective reality outside of itself simultaneously, so that it's always in context. With the ego is in a context that the ego identifies, I am Martin sitting here in front of my computer talking to these dudes from Iceland. Okay, so the ego is actively creating my sense of self and who it is that I'm interacting with simultaneously. So then the ego death experience dissolves that boundary between subject and object, me and not me, self and not self, so that everything is experienced as one unified totality that doesn't have any inherent limits, borders, or boundaries.
Yeah.
So it is a state of infinite oneness and infinite awareness that is not personally identified.
I
It
have
can
to.
be. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, because you said you can't have an ego death, or most people don't usually have ego deaths uh, during experiences that often do get described as, in fact, ego deaths. So I was wondering, is there a way to just take enough of something other than 5-MeO DMT to actually get to the ego death? It was just the obvious question. I had to go for it.
Yeah, so it does show up, and it's not necessarily a matter of taking enough, um, because sometimes the more you take, the more you're actually amplifying other aspects of the ego. So, for example, it's really, really rare for someone to experience a full ego death and a unitary state of being on DMT. And it's not just a matter of taking more, because the more DMT you take, the more hypervisual it becomes. And visual processing is one of the primary ways through which the ego establishes a sense of perspective, because the ego is always saying, whoa, what's that? What's that? What's that? What's that? What's that going to do? Who is that over there? So as long as we are amplifying that visual perception, we're actually amplifying the need for the ego to be present. So like the idea of, well, just take more DMT, you'll have an ego death. Like, no, it's going to become more hypervisual. You're probably going to be more locked into your ego. And here, this is a place where, definitely people are traditionally, they're not very happy with me. But I always bring out Terence McKenna as an example.
I
That
was
if you
also
look,
wanted to bring him up, so
Yeah,
you beat me to it. Go
he's gonna have to
ahead.
come up
okay,
at some point. Yeah.
yeah. So Terence McKenna is one of the most famous promoters of the DMT experience. And something I've done is I've gone and I've analyzed his talks about DMT, and I've tried to highlight, like, look, everything he's talking about here, this is his ego. That there is no example anywhere that I've been able to find in Terence McKenna's descriptions that I would say, like, oh, he actually had a full ego death experience and he had a non-dual experience. That everything is his ego trying to grapple with, what the fuck are these machine elves, and why are there UFOs here, and what are these aliens doing? And in fact, he described the DMT experience as an entry into the ultimate state of otherness.
Mm.
And otherness is the complete opposite of the non-dual experience, because within the non-dual experience, there's no such thing as otherness, because otherness means completely foreign, completely separate, completely enigmatic and inscrutable and unknowable. An object. So he proposed this idea that there would be this transcendent object at the end of time that would miraculously appear in December 22nd of 2012, and that then we would all be creating UFOs made out of language, and we would fly off into the cosmos to join our intergalactic brethren.
Wait,
That's all
Terence McKenna
ego.
said that?
Oh yeah.
Really? All
Well,
right.
okay, so maybe even by this point, man, here we are, 2025, many years after the supposed 2012 bullshit.
Maybe we all
But
just missed it.
well, this is the thing, is that I think maybe he's been whitewashed a little bit, because he did write in his book True Hallucinations around these ideas of around 2012. He said, "Look, I'm either crazy or I'm this century's unsung Newton." So he kind of laid it out there, like, if I'm right, like, damn, I've really uncovered something. But if I'm not right, I think this is all like insane bullshit.
Right.
And the fact that 2012 came and went and there was no transcendental object at the end of time, I think it's pretty clear. Like, look, this is just your ego masturbating with itself, ultimately, that this is not a reflection of reality.
I really want to dive into some of this because like this is one of the subjects that I find like very interesting because I mean, first of all, I love Terence McKenna. I see him more so as an artist or a poet, and I feel like he saw himself slightly in those terms as well. He had a lot of self humor, and he didn't really claim to be some uh, conveyor of absolute truth, let's say. And I feel like also at the same time that his interest may have simply lay more in the field of otherness, and this gets into the idea of what God is looking for is not just to be in this unitary state, but also it's highly interested in experiencing this phenomenon of other, of
Yes.
deluding itself into thinking that it's separate from itself in order to have some kind of an experience. So um, from a certain perspective, you could say this is some of the most interesting things that God could be doing, is exploring this infinite sense of otherness.
God just couldn't take it being in the DMT state 24/7. He had to, we
Yeah.
have to drop down. Yeah.
Well, I'd kind of counter that with, I think that maybe Kalindi Iyi gives us a better model for what you're just describing right
Right.
there, Helgi. So Kalindi Iyi, he died a few years back, but his claim to fame was Kalindi liked to take up to 40 grams of mushrooms.
Insane.
And And he was
Fuck.
very interested in exploring this topic of like what is out there within consciousness, and can I find like all the little nooks and crannies and all the weird otherness that's out there. But here's a place where Kalindi, I think, is far more insightful than Terence, because again, Terence is always promoting this idea like this is the alien other. It's other, 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 other. And he never really recognized like, actually, I think this is me in a fundamental sense. So it remains this transcendent other that can never really be known. Whereas Kalindi E, in our private conversations together, we would reach the point, talking about all this, and then there was one time where we both said at the same time, I mean, this is great. We were in the back of a car in Vancouver and we were being driven somewhere, and we both said, I forget the exact wording, but it was like, and the full realization is knowing that it's all you. And we were in complete agreement with that. So he had a very different route that he wanted to take mushrooms so he could see lots of weird shit. But he also recognized this is all me producing all of this. And not just Kalindi, but that there's really only one universal being in consciousness that is interacting with itself. But I don't think that Terence ever actually came to
Yeah,
that realization himself. I don't think there's
I
really any
agree.
evidence of that. And I'd
I think it was
also want to point
close
out,
at times. It felt like he was almost there, but never really completely went there.
yeah, and that I think it's also important to recognize that in the last 15 years of his life, when he was sharing all of this information, he had actually sworn off psychedelics because he had an experience that really deeply, profoundly scared him. And that even though he's out there giving talks, telling people, yeah, take all this DMT, take these heroic doses of mushrooms, he actually something had scared him, and I don't know what it was, but he himself was not taking any psychedelics at that time that he was giving all of these talks, and he wasn't really even sharing that. Yeah, something happened that scared the shit out of me to my core, and so I can't even do this. That I'm trying to get everybody else to do, but I can't do it
Mm.
myself.
There's a lack of honesty there
Yeah,
and a
and
lack
I
of
think something that's
transparency.
quite telling is that Um, I've only seen like one reference from Terence McKenna around 5-MeO DMT, and I think that this is just really indicative of his whole approach. Is that he said, well, with 5-MeO DMT, it's just this feeling,
Hmm.
but with DMT, I really hallucinate. So that's what I'm interested in.
Mm.
And so I think
Ah,
that just reveals, like, yeah, he the feeling. What is the feeling of 5-MeO? Well, if you go all the way into it, the feeling is everything is one universal being interacting with itself out of the pure energy of unconditional love. And he couldn't even process that. But like, give me machine elves, give me aliens, give me UFOs. I'm cool
Hmm.
with that.
Right. So I came up with this phrase. I don't know if it's philosophically accurate, but I think you know those terms better than me. But I feel like he was very caught up in the phenomenology and not interested enough in the epistemology and the ontology. And I'm
Yeah.
wondering if you could define those terms
Yeah.
and relate it to
So,
McKenna.
so phenomenology is putting our attention and descriptive powers into describing phenomenon. So, this was a philosophical movement um, that actually started with some philosophers who were um, early experiences of mescaline. And that kind of got them in this idea of like, wow, we really need to pay attention to how do phenomena arise within the sensory apparatus of the human matrix, and then what can we say about that? So phenomenology is the idea is that it presents, hopefully, a more neutral route to describing what's going on without necessarily evaluating it. So, one of the places that this showed up was like with William James, and he created his book called The Variety of Religious Experience. And he actually was an American philosopher. And I don't know if he would have called it phenomenology, but that's kind of the approach that he was taking. Was he wanted to look at what are the different experiences that people are having that they say are spiritual or religious in nature. And he just wanted to describe the experience. And actually, he experimented with nitrous oxide. So he's, like laughing gas. And he's like, I'm having spiritual experiences. And so the idea of phenomenology is that you're not necessarily asking, is this real? But you're just asking, what is the experience?
Right.
What is it like to have this experience? And then epistemology is then asking, how do we know what we know? So like if the phenomenon, so if we go to Terence McKenna, he says, well, every time I smoke DMT, I see these machine elves. That's a phenomenological experience. And that we can't argue with that. It's like he sees machine elves.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Fair enough.
But then if he's asking, what is the nature of their existence? Then, and how can we know? Like he would ask, like, well, are they just there when I smoke DMT? Is it a product of my mind? Do they exist somewhere out there in reality? Those are actually ontological questions. So that's ontology. But then epistemology is, well, then how do we go about determining whether these things are real or not? And what evidence do we use and how do we weigh and measure that evidence? So ontology is the branch of science and philosophy that asks, what is real? Epistemology is how do we go about knowing something is real? And then phenomenology is what is the experience of that? So if we take something, let's just say an ontological statement would be physical objects are made out of different chemical compounds. That's an ontological statement. Epistemology would then be, well, through our scientific apparatus, such as an electron microscope or something like that, we can actually see, we can start to say, oh, well, these molecules are made out of different collections of atoms and that they're configured in these different ways. And then phenomenology would be, okay, well, if I mix this chemical with this chemical, I'm going to predict that we'll get some kind of reaction from that. And that, oh, look, the phenomenon took place. So we put these two chemicals together and they exploded. And based on our theories of what is the nature of chemical elements, we can see that this is actually confirmation of that. So these are all deeply involved in science,
And
phenomenology,
psychedelics.
epistemology. Yes, and
And like
psychedelics.
if we like bring this back to DMT and 5-MeO, you could say that 5-MeO is the most ontological substance on the planet, and you could say that NN-DMT is the most phenomenological substance on the planet, and they kind of hit those two ends of the spectrum in a certain sense.
Yes, I think that that's a pretty good characterization of that. But then it raises the question. So this is an ontological question. Are the beings that we see in a DMT trip, do they have an independent existence from us? Do they exist somewhere out there? Or are they merely a phenomenological artifact of having taken a very powerful psychedelic? And this is where my ontological answer to that is when we amplify the ego into a high energetic state where it is not able to dissolve, then the ego is going to project out all kinds of otherness into that state because it's holding on to a sense of self within this maelstrom of energetic visuals that are taking place. So my position is that when the ego is there, it creates a sense of otherness simultaneously. So that these are products of the ego and that they are not something that exist independently of the person observing and experiencing them there in that moment. So here's where I would say that when Terence McKenna like asked, like, do these machine elves exist somewhere out there? My answer would be no, they don't. And because of the ontological nature of 5-MeO DMT, I also put out the proposition that once you've learned how to transcend your ego and then pay attention to how your ego constructs its sense of self and sense of otherness at the same time, this dependent nature of the phenomenology of the DMT experience on the presence of the ego, this actually becomes obvious. It becomes self-evident at that time. But again, I don't think that Terence McKenna really had, any significant experience of transcending the ego into the non-dual state. So he never had that ontological experience from which to measure the phenomenological presentation of vast infinite otherness within the DMT experience.
Right. Oh, this is so interesting because I don't want to hoard all the questions, but this is really like, you
Keep it
know,
going. Keep it going. Helge, could I just ask one clarifying question first, and then you can.
of course, I'll try to hold on to the
All right.
thought.
So there's just one thing I wanted to clarify for my scientifically minded, or shall we say, not non-woo-woo friends. What do you mean by energy? Do you differentiate spiritual energy and physical energy? Because I heard you talking about, it's come up 3 times now, so I just had to jump in with this question at this point, where you describe energy or egoic energy, or somehow the ego gets overloaded with energy, is the kind of more or less the jargon that you use to describe that. So I'm just wondering if there's an overlap between spiritual or metaphysical energy and physical force.
Okay, good question. Um, I am probably one of the least woo-woo
I have
person,
gathered. I have gathered. That's why
yeah,
I ask.
that you'll ever come across. So it is important to clarify because I don't even like using the term spiritual. I'm not into metaphysics at all. Um, I am interested in what basically we could call the scientific materialist worldview, that I look at everything that exists within reality is something that is energetic in nature, and I don't differentiate that there is some kind of spiritual energy or spiritual realm or anything like that. um, so when we're talking about energy, that we're talking about everyday normal things. Okay. So like actually right now, the energy of my dog, she wants to go outside. I'm just going to go open the door for her and let her outside. I'll be right back.
We'll fill in the gap,
We'll fill in the gap.
or we'll cut it out. Cut.
Cut, cut. Okay. Um, and actually, I usually bring in my dog because she's a good example. So first of all, um, everything that exists within reality is either highly condensed energy or it is electromagnetic energy. So electromagnetic energy is radiation. And if you leave the planet and if you get out of the magnetosphere of good old planet Earth here, you're going to be bombarded with solar and galactic radiation. So there's and this is what we call the electromagnetic spectrum. And a very small sliver of that, we call that the visible light spectrum. And that's what our eyes are able to say, okay, I can translate this into colors, into shapes and objects. And so that's all. We talk about space as being empty, but it actually isn't empty at all. It's empty of physical matter for the most part. It's just vast stretches of emptiness, but that emptiness is filled with all kinds of electromagnetic energy, and that's why we really can't go off in a spaceship and just go fly around because that's going to kill us as human beings. Like as these little animals, like too much radiation is not a good thing. And so interstellar space, the vast stretches of empty space is actually it's this electromagnetic soup. All this energy is out there. And it has different frequencies and different amplitudes and all of that, all the way from gamma rays to X rays. And so these are all energies. So energies are fluctuations in frequency and intensity over time. And then we have matter. Matter is just condensed energy. So when we get down to the smallest subatomic particles, we just have these packets of energy that are called quanta. And this is quantum physics. And then those quanta, they can form into atoms, and atoms have electrons, positons, and neutrons, and that these are vibrating energies that are in orbit around each other, and they cohere into certain little energetic packets. And then these little energetic packets, they get put together and they form chemicals, and chemicals then can form molecules, and molecules can then form physical objects. And then when those start self-organizing, that's what we call organic life and living beings. But all of it is energy from the objects themselves that comprise the physical structure. And then living structure itself runs off of energy. So again, our brains produce electromagnetic energy. It produces an electromagnetic field of energy. Our heart, which is a heart rate, right? That is obviously energy. That's a little electromagnetic pulse. It creates a large electromagnetic field around the body. And again, our emotions are energy, our thoughts are energy, our sensations are energy. Everything that we perceive is a translation of energy into a virtual construct that we make within our brain that says, this is reality, this is what I'm experiencing. So everything is energy. And just notice that I've not talked about spirits, I've not talked about astral realms, I've not talked about anything metaphysical. This is all stuff that we can confirm and experience in our day-to-day lives.
Totally. I've just always felt like there's a little bit, I've had a difficult time reconciling the fact that we use the same word for physical energy as we do for experienced energy in, let's say, a thought or an emotion, because those don't really exist in the same sense in the physical realm. Um, but do you see where I'm coming from?
Well, I think that they do, because thoughts, look, if somebody is brain dead, there's no electroactivity in their brain, they're not having any thoughts. That these are electromagnetic energies and pulses, and that constantly our brains are always producing a certain frequency. So we've got um, our normal waking day consciousness frequencies are called alpha and beta. And then when we are dreaming, those are delta waves. When we are in deep sleep and there is no conscious thought taking place, those are theta waves. And then when we go into highly energized, highly coherent brain waves, such as gamma waves, we are in a non-dual state of consciousness and being. So there's definitely a correlation between the energetic waveforms that are being produced by the electromagnetic activity of the brain and different states of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just also wanted to point the listeners, it's very interesting. There's a video on YouTube of Martin experiencing 5-MeO DMT while having his brain scanned. And there they find out that the brain is producing gamma waves. So go
Yeah.
check that out. That's a cool one.
Yeah. And then again, our emotional states. I mean, just think about any emotion you've ever had, that it literally rises as a wave, and then we either suppress the wave, like, oh, don't feel that, or the wave breaks and we laugh or we cry or we experience joy or we experience terror. And then as long as we don't get stuck in a feedback loop, which is a self-referential form of energy that keeps replicating itself, if we're not stuck in a feedback loop, that wave will crest and break, and then that emotion will wash out. And then during that time period, our body is actually producing molecules that are amplifying that. And so what we're doing is we're absorbing those molecules, and that energy is dissipating into the expression of what we, from a phenomenological standpoint, say, I experienced an emotion.
Yeah.
But there's all these different ways that we could describe it from a physiological standpoint and also from an energetic standpoint.
Yeah, yeah. I still see a bit of a divide between subjective experience of an
Right.
emotion versus the biological processes or yeah, physiological processes that are very much scientifically measurable. You can go in with your scientific instruments and be like, "Whoa, that molecule just made a few newtons, sorry, a few thousandth of a newton probably in that direction for the purpose of, continuing this biological process." There's that side of it, which is clearly driven by energy, as you say, and matter is energy as well. But then there's just the subjective experience of an emotion that, I mean, they're happening simultaneously and there's a correlation, but they still seem like two different things to me. Like,
Because you're observing them through two different instruments, though.
Yeah, yeah. I
okay.
would agree with Helgi there that I think you're just a little bit too caught up on the term itself. So I would just invite you, like, from the subjective experience, to kind of ask yourself, what is it like to experience an emotion? So this is a phenomenological question, that an emotion doesn't hit full on immediately. Like there is a starting point. Like, oh, it's arising, and then as an emotion you experience that. Like if it's a positive emotion, you usually feel yourself, oh, I'm getting warm, I'm expanding, I'm opening, and then eventually that will wash out. Or if we're experiencing fear, that oh, that's an abrupt change and I'm pulling in and I'm starting to feel cold. I'm starting to feel chilled. So it's just I think it's just a descriptive matter. And I do think that it is a little bit problematic that energy gets talked about in sort of new age modalities.
Yeah, that
So,
drives me wild, man. That's the thing. I'm trying to
yeah.
get to the bottom of this. Uh,
Yeah, well, that's where I think it's always just useful to come back to your own lived experience. And that we don't need to be woo woo about it. We don't need to be metaphysical about it. And this is also where I really tend to take people to task if they, you know, it's one thing if somebody comes on my podcast and they want to talk about, you know, their views that I usually let stuff slide there. But if I'm working with a client or something like that, and somebody starts to talk about it's the energy of my karma or something like that, that's usually a place where I'll try and correct people. Like, look, I don't want to get into metaphysics. That I just don't think it's necessary, and always want to try and bring it back to someone's direct lived experience as best as we can.
It's interesting because, like, in my experience, I've usually used metaphysics and epistemology and ontology interchangeably. And I noticed that some people do that too. Um, so I'm just wondering, like, what's your perspective on that?
Well, metaphysics, I mean, this was a term that was first introduced by Aristotle way back in the day because he wrote his book on physics, which it's important to recognize that Aristotle was mostly wrong. Um, Aristotle did not create the foundation for the study of physics because he was wrong about a lot of stuff. But what he was attempting this was an early Greek attempt to how can we describe how the world works in terms of physical properties and the interaction of matter and energy and that kind of stuff. And again, he said a bunch of stuff that's just like, no, that's wrong. Like we now know that reality doesn't work that way. Um, and then his next book was Metaphysics, which means like beyond or after physics. And so the way that the term metaphysics tends to get used today is proposed structures of a non-physical nature
Mm.
that influence and impact how reality unfolds at the physical level.
And that's a
so,
dualistic paradigm, basically.
and by that
Yeah.
definition, some traditional schools of meditation, like Buddhism or I suppose Taoism as well, would fall under that definition, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's start with something physical, and then we'll go metaphysical. So let's say somebody has a child, and that child has certain from a physical standpoint, we could say that person has a potential genetic predisposition to have certain physical, behavioral, and other traits that they inherited from their parents. And we can say, well, it's in the DNA. That's where it comes from. Okay, so that's a biological, physical explanation for why somebody might be one way or another. Buddhism, on the other hand, says, well, souls don't exist, but there is this thing called the stream of consciousness. And the stream of consciousness is impacted by karma, which is a metaphysical energy that does not exist in the physical realm and has no physical correlate, and we cannot find it or identify it anywhere. But what happens is, based on the moral turpitude, I don't know if I'm using that correctly, but anyway, based on the moral consequences of your choices, you will generate karma at the metaphysical level. And this karma is then going to impact that stream of consciousness in the time period between the death of one physical body and the birth of the next physical body. That karma will impact the stream of consciousness, which will then influence when and where this person is reborn into a new life. And that karma is then going to, so let's say you did something really shitty in your last life. Let's say you murdered 1 million people. Well, that's really bad karma. So then your next life, you're going to be born somewhere in poverty and you're going to be starving to death. And maybe you're going to have some congenital diseases that make sure that you suffer really badly in your life. So the Buddhist answer is like, karma's a bitch, man. That's karma, that these metaphysical energies have created the conditions of your rebirth. Now, from a scientific standpoint, we can say like that, well, that's not science because we're talking about stuff that we can't observe, we can't measure, we can't account for, and it's all embedded within a moral system that says that your behavior in this life is going to determine what happens to you in a next life.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't even measure for that kind of thing. So that's purely a metaphysical statement that has no physical correlate that we could ever go to and investigate scientifically in any capacity. So that's metaphysics. And I like to stay away from metaphysics because I like to say, like, look, it's just a bunch of made up stuff. Like, we can't ever know any of that stuff. So
But
let's try and keep our conversation into what we can actually know. So this
yes,
gets back to epistemology.
we got there. Yes, continue. Sorry.
No, well, that was the point. That was the rim
It's
shot.
it's interesting because I have heard people use metaphysics in a different way in the sense that it's funny you say metaphysics is a proposed structure, and basically like if you look at the term meta, it kind of implies going beyond structure. So the physics of physics in a certain way, and this term meta is often very connected to this non-dual experience. So I'd be curious, like how does the term meta fit into the whole picture?
Oh yeah, it's one
Well,
of our favorites.
well, meta. I think we need to recognize that meta has become it's embedded in the modern cultural lexicon, and so it's like even a comment that people say, "Ooh, that's so meta." What do you mean by that? If we go back to Aristotle, it just meant metaphysics literally is this is the book I'm writing after the book I wrote about physics. So it just means after, right? This is
Mm,
after physics. Um, but we've taken it to mean it's like it's the next level up. That's the way that it gets used, or that somehow meta. So if this is our material, meta is above it, and through that meta perspective, we say we look down on this other field of experience and knowledge. And so this provides us with it's a meta perspective. It's a
right,
God's eye view in some sense. So
right.
um, it's this idea that through some kind of perceptual shift, we are able to enter into a new way of seeing older materials or older things that have been experienced and arrive at new conclusions about what that is. So again, going back into the Buddhist example, um, we could say, look, we can all observe that people are born and die, and that it's kind of an interesting question of like, why do people seem to be born with different abilities, talents, or potential diseases or deficiencies? Like that's an interesting question. Now, I would say that the ancient Buddhists, and certainly Buddha himself, they didn't know anything about genetics. So they didn't
Right.
have an answer for that. Like we could say, like, well, actually, we've got this thing called DNA, and that encodes certain levels of information that's going to influence how the biological being develops. Um, so the meta experience there would be Buddha in his enlightenment experience, sitting under the Bodhi tree, was able to perceive, like, oh, this is how karma works.
Hmm.
But it's important to keep in mind that Buddha arose within the context of Hindu metaphysics, which were already present. So he challenged certain aspects of Hindu metaphysics. So one proposition of Hindu metaphysics is that you are a soul that is on a process of reincarnation to reach enlightenment. And also, the Hindu metaphysics were in order for that soul to reach enlightenment, that soul needs to follow the conditions set forth in the Vedas. Okay, 1 second. Moxie's asking to come back in.
Go for it.
Moxie at it again.
Okay.
Because, she doesn't care we're doing an interview. So Buddha comes along and he has his enlightenment experience and he says, oh shit, you know what? I'm not able to perceive the existence of souls anywhere. He says, I've searched everywhere and I can't find the soul. Therefore, the soul must not exist. And if the soul doesn't exist, then who gives a fuck what the Vedas say about what you should do to ensure that your soul reaches a state of enlightenment? Because the Vedas are built on the proposition that souls exist. Therefore, we don't need to follow the structures of the Vedas. But Buddha wasn't ready to throw out the whole karma and uh, uh, rebirth paradigm that existed within that metastructure of Indian metaphysics. So he just altered it and said, oh no, karma is produced by something else. Karma is produced by moral or immoral actions. That's what determines how karma is produced. And that influences rebirth. So he said, look, we don't have to follow the Vedas. We don't have to pray to the gods and goddesses because this is just basically made up stuff anyway. But we do need to practice right speech, right thought, right action, right philosophy, right meditation, right relationship, all of these things. And this became the Eightfold Path of
Right.
Buddhism. But again, it's still promoting a metaphysical view that is not open to direct confirmation. And it is always displaced onto, well, this is about something that happens in your next life or your next life. So this is another place where I just like to, let's bring it back to what is my experience of living here
You
now.
go with Newton's flaming razor sword, I believe it's called, where you say we can't prove or disprove it, so let's let go of it. I mean, I like
Yeah,
I like that perspective, but I'd really like to jump in with a different one right now that I've gravitated towards since growing up as a 100% or 200% atheist.
All of us here, actually.
Yeah, like I grew up making so much fun of religion specifically, and for good reason as well. There's a lot of hilarious stuff there to make fun of. Um, most like first and foremost, it was the fact that they believe stuff. Religious people believe stuff that can't be proven or disproven,
yeah.
and we should spend our time and energy somewhere else. Therefore, it's not really a useful territory for our efforts. Um, but what do you think about the idea that whatever you choose to believe becomes your reality if you are, in fact, consciousness, which is our assumption right now?
And
You are,
well, I think it's important to distinguish, like, when we ask this question, where there's two yous that can be used. Like, you as God can imagine anything, but like I imagine like a human, the belief powers or the powers of physical manifestation of a human are limited. But
yes, yes. Also, okay, great thought to add to that before you respond, Martin. Um, Another thing I wanted to add is that the reason I used to make this much fun of religion, and I still do. I still laugh at still laugh at Leviticus every now and then just for fun. There's a lot of funny shit in there. But
Sure.
um, then I came to realize that we were laughing at religion's expense because it doesn't follow what is currently the highest value, as I perceive it, in the West, which is intellectual honesty. And believing in a god, or it's just like believing in Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy in that sense. But then I came to realize I like intellectual honesty, but I like happiness more. And if there is ever an instance where I need to choose intellectual honesty or happiness, I'm going to choose happiness because that's just a higher value for me. And so this karmic idea, that's where I thought of speaking to this, because like it's obviously not provable or disprovable whether or not your consciousness goes on into some other body after you die, perhaps potentially in an insect's body half a galaxy away, who knows. um, you can't prove it or disprove it, but you can operate on the assumption that it is true, which is how I think about the word belief. I believe this equates to I operate on the assumption that this is true. Um, and there are certainly some instances I could think of where believing or operating on the assumption that rebirth and karma is true would make me a happier individual. Um, so yeah, does that kind of make sense where I'm coming from? I'd love
Yeah,
your
yeah.
response to that.
Yeah, it makes sense. There's a lot going on there. Uh, so first, I would just want to respond just by making it clear to your listeners that I am 100% non-spiritual, non-religious. I do not participate in any spiritual tradition or any religion whatsoever. I don't promote them. Um, and here's the my ultimate take is that religions are not about reality. They never have been about reality in any way, shape, or form. And really, religion, as we understand it, is more about organizing society and creating specific kinds of egoic identities that follow agreed upon rules and values and meanings. And in that sense, that they are functional and that they can provide a means through which a society self-organizes and creates a sense of self and history and meaning, but have nothing to do with the nature of reality at all. And I'm very interested, like, what's real? And with the happiness versus intellectual honesty, I think that this is one that a lot of people who are actually smart and think about shit come up against, is that you reach a point where your happiness perhaps does get subsumed under intellectual honesty, because you know that, well, I'm not able to honestly bullshit myself anymore.
Yeah,
And so that we can't just, it seems like a simple dichotomy, like, well, I'm just going to choose happiness. But if you sense that you are being intellectually dishonest with yourself, in the long run, that's not going to be satisfactory. And then with the belief creates reality thing, is one of the things that, like, honestly just so rubs me the wrong way. So I'll just give a really clear example. I think it was last week, it was maybe last week or the week before, that some Christian minister in South Africa was like, hey, the rapture is going to happen next week. And
oh
Christians
wow,
around the world were like, hallelujah, hallelujah, Jesus is coming
it's
back,
always
rapture
next
is going to
week.
happen.
Yeah.
And it filled them with so much happiness. And so then people sold their cars and they sold their homes and they said goodbye to their families. And then you know what? It was all bullshit. There was no rapture. And so they received a temporary happiness from that completely erroneous bullshit belief. And then there is the crude reckoning with reality that we just made that shit up. And yeah, it made us feel good, but then there's the crash. So I always like to say, like, believe whatever you want. Reality will always win in the end.
It's like
I
math.
choose to align myself with reality.
Hmm.
And I'm not interested in aligning myself with beliefs just because they make me feel good. That I would honestly say, like, it's just a cop out, really. And I don't think that anybody who, you know, the more ignorant you are, the dumber you are, the easier it is to believe in feel good mythological realities and beliefs, and like, oh yeah, I create my own reality with my beliefs. And it's like, yeah, but you're wrong. I mean, it's just not true. And the choosing belief over reality is also incredibly dangerous and destructive. I'm going to bring it back to politics here.
Yeah.
The MAGA world, the Make America a Great Again world, the Trump cult, they really do believe that Trump won the 2020 election in the United States. They believe it.
Hmm. Yeah.
What evidence is there that there actually was systemic voter fraud that brought Biden into power and that Trump unfairly lost? The actual evidence, zero. And we are now living through the aftermath of this belief in this fantasy reality where we've got a bunch of fascist dipshits in charge, and they're doing incredible, incredible damage, not only to the United States, but around the world. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the danger of believing bullshit.
Preach.
Yeah.
And I think we
Yes.
need more of this, like in a lot of the spiritual circles. There's a lot of fake positivity and bullshit, and people like, well, you're getting too caught up in 3D stuff, and don't you see it's
Yeah.
all good? And there's this conflation of like, yes, when you have a non-dual experience, you can realize that reality is absolutely good in the ultimate sense, but you are also living through an incarnation, a human experience where we actually have preferences for what we want. And let's not
Right.
just throw everything out and create a hellhole. Let's try to have a good time,
But then there's also something to be said for having a good time, as you say, in just believing that you're having a good time. You get to, like, or in making the decision that whatever your experience is in the present moment, the present moment is a good time. And apparently that's possible for a fully awakened for a consciousness that has become fully aware of itself all the time. Whatever you're going through is a good time. Do you have a take on that, actually, Martin?
Yeah. Well, I like what Helgi just raised here, that I think that the idea of having a good time and being centered in a sense of trust and a sense of perfection, um, that I think that gets used as a tool for spiritual bypassing more than anything else.
I think
So,
Helgi has said the exact same thing to me at some point, but yeah, yeah.
yeah. So I can have a good time saying, I think Trump is a total fucking dipshit and I am opposed to what he is doing. And so the spiritual folk come in, it's like, oh, like, don't use language like that. Like, that's mean. Like, you're being really judgmental. It's like, no, actually, that's just my honest assessment. I think the dude's a fucking dipshit. I don't mean that to be judgmental, that I think he's a fucking moron. That I don't think there's any argument there. And we can pull a Charlie Kirk, right? Trump is a fucking moron. Prove me wrong. I mean, even on my Facebook page months ago, I put out the Trump challenge. I said, I challenge anyone to come back with any kind of extended discourse from Trump where whatever the discourse is, it is free from lies, distortions, and things that the entire statement must be factually correct, historically true, scientifically accurate, and reflect of our actual basis of knowledge. And no one's been able to do it because he's full of fucking shit all the time. Now, I actually feel good saying that. I'm happy saying that. Um, I'm not ruining my sense of reality based on saying that. And I think that, again, we're going back on like the intellectual honesty versus happiness.
Yeah.
That I think it's easier for some people to say, oh, well, you know, he's not sending troops into my town, so it's not a big deal. And that he's not sending the ICE agents to pick up my friends. So, I'm going to be cool with it, and I'm just going to stay in a state of equanimity.
Hmm.
But one of the things that, I've tried to point out to people is like, look, this is abstract, that if everything that Trump is currently proposing goes through, it is only a matter of time, seriously, before I am rounded up as a domestic terrorist, and that people who have come on my podcast and shared their views, they also will be labeled as domestic terrorists, and that we will be imprisoned. That's where this is headed. So this isn't some, oh, well, let's just be cool with it. It's like, no, I'm pushing back because my perception is that my very real freedom and ability to express myself freely is currently under threat.
Yeah.
And no, there's no troops at my door at the moment, but this guy is moving pretty fast, and he is looking to extend his power as much as he possibly can. And I'm just not going to sit around and just say, oh, yeah, let's just all love one another. It's
Yeah,
like,
that's
no, actually, I want to live in a secular constitutional republic. That is my preference
mhm.
as a human being. I don't want to live in a fascist dictatorship.
Yeah.
Very
But
valid.
yes, definitely very valid. But also, like as you said yourself, you aren't really this person who's going to get rounded up. Uh, So,
N-
yeah.
Well, I very well may be. I
Hmm.
mean, that's my point, is that the way things are moving, um, like here, just right here on this conversation, that keep in mind that Trump has literally said anyone who critiques him, that should be illegal. He says that's illegal. To say anything mean about me, that's illegal. I've
And
said a
that's
few
true.
mean things about him. So according to him,
Wild.
I actually am a domestic terrorist.
Mm.
So no, they're not coming to round me up yet.
Yeah.
But
And this term
that's an
terrorism, it's
important
like
corollary.
Yeah.
it's the most this is the perfect tool of the ego. And you see this also with Israel. Like everybody, you can just label people a terrorist, and then you're free to do whatever
Yeah,
because you're inherently the good guy. And this is like the very mechanism of evil is projecting it outside to the other and proclaiming yourself as an agent of absolute good. And this is how most of the horrors in human history have happened through people that really believe that they are on the morally righteous side of things.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
nobody really thinks they're the bad guy, of course.
No, but but like with what's happening in U.S. culture right now, like I like to point out, like according to my analysis, this is why we want to have non-dual experiences and why we want to enter into a state of energetic clarity within ourselves, because what's happening is that these are all reactions of the ego from a pathological perspective being
Yeah.
played out at the national and international stage, and that
Mm,
this is not healthy at all.
right.
And that I think that we need to apply some intellectual rigor and honesty to the situation, and then also even play up the utilitarian side of like, is this actually a route to lasting happiness?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't think so
And
at
people are
all.
gonna find out. And this is the trend for humans. We don't really make a change unless we really start to feel it ourselves. Unfortunately, like we would like to get to the place where we can uh, think ahead a little bit.
Yeah.
But
And that's
yeah,
where
go ahead.
we're not thinking ahead. So actually, this brings me, I think, to a good example where we can get into the whole belief thing. Like, well, if you believe it, it is true. Like, no, that's bullshit. So one of the beliefs that Trump and company are trying to promote is this idea that climate change is all a hoax.
Very damaging idea.
And
Yeah.
and I don't know if he actually believes that or not, but I don't know if Trump really believes anything that he says for the most part.
That was a
But
hard
it's
guy to
certainly
pin down, yeah.
putting that out there. Um, And, this is just like, this is the ostrich sticking his head in the sand. That scientists across the board around the world, they all say, like, climate change, this is a serious existential threat to humanity and the entire biosphere. So we can believe it's not a problem as much as we want, but is that going to change the fact that there are wildfires and droughts and intensifying category 5 hurricanes and starvation and all the rest that comes from climate change? Simply believing, oh, it's not a problem, that's a recipe for disaster,
Yeah.
for pain and suffering. And so it's just another example. Like, look, I always like to say reality does not give a shit what you believe. Reality is what reality is. Um, and that the more our beliefs displace from what is actually real, the more potential damage and harm we do to ourselves and others,
Hmm.
because we're not operating within reality. We're operating within a make believe system.
Mm.
Right.
What do you
And
make
you're
of?
always punished for falsehood, basically. In the long run, sooner or
Yeah.
later,
Yeah.
falsehood, the devil's gonna shoot himself in the foot.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, what do you make of Jesus' miracles then? Do you think you seem to think that Jesus was an actual guy back in the day? Or wait, have we not touched on Jesus yet? Am I confusing
No, we
this?
haven't touched on Jesus. We can
We
talk about
haven't touched on
Jesus.
Jesus. Okay, let's talk about Jesus.
Jesus Christ.
We're going in. Um,
Okay.
so I
So,
wanted to. Do you first of all, yes or no? Do you believe he actually existed, in some way, shape, or form, or have you no opinion on the matter? It's also an option.
um, Primarily, I would characterize whatever we think of as Jesus as that is a mythological and literary character. That is something that's been created through literature and storytelling.
Yes.
Um, so in terms of like the historical Jesus, I don't think, for one, I don't think we know anything about the quote historical Jesus. And I'm somewhat skeptical about whether this is actually a person or not, or just a literary character that was created.
Hmm.
There's
Um,
not a lot of data on it at all.
no, and that
Okay.
everything was really so. If we want to follow the Jesus timeline, what we first have was a collection of sayings, and then those collection of sayings, then they were woven into these stories that were called the Gospels, and then these Gospels, they didn't even get the facts straight. I mean, the original Gospels that were prevalent in early Christianity widely disagreed with each other. There was no uniform story that was being told. There was multiple different stories with this character of Jesus, and they did not agree on the most crucial points in
Mm.
terms of was he
Yeah.
crucified or not? Some of them said yes, some of them said no. Did he resurrect or not? Some of the gospels said yes, some of them said no. Did he perform these miracles or not? Some said yes, some said no. Was he married
Interesting.
or not? Some said yes, some said no. Um, and that it wasn't until some several hundred years into this new religion of Christianity that any kind of doctrinal conformity was introduced through the Council of Nicaea. And then they created a certain level of narrative conformity, and the Gospels were edited to make them agree a bit more with each other. And then the vast majority of Gospels that were written about Jesus were excluded, and they were deemed to be heretical. But that was by people who lived 300 years after the supposed time of Jesus. None of them knew the guy. No, none of them were there. None of them had any evidence. So that was all just a doctrinal position that we want the Gospels to say a certain thing because that attributes a certain level of authority and power to the church that we are trying to establish. So we can see that it was created for socio-political, cultural reasons.
Mm.
So that's just where I say, look, we don't have any information about who this guy actually was, if he even was a guy, or what in the world he was doing, and that even there still are some religious traditions around today that say, well, actually, it wasn't Jesus at all. That was all John the Baptist. And then there were some religious traditions that did not survive to this present day who said that no, it wasn't Jesus, it was this other guy. Um, so there's just a lot of variability there. And this is the dark box of history that we cannot go back and recreate any of this. We can't go back and check. So that's why I just like to say whatever it is that we think of as Jesus today, some 2,000 years later, well, that's a literary character and construct. In the same way that we can get to arguments about, well, what's Superman's backstory, right? Well, he's been created through comics and movies and television shows, and we got the same thing with Batman and all the rest of these superheroes, that these are literary characters. And I can tell you the backstory of Harry Potter. Doesn't mean Harry Potter is real. And now there's going to be a new Harry Potter series that's coming out, and so we're going to see, like, what does that agree with the Harry Potter movies, and which one is canonical, which came first, or like Star Wars, right? Where when Disney bought Star Wars, one of the big things that they had to do was they had to clean up the canon, where they said, okay, we've got all this fan fiction about Star Wars, or we got to decide what from the fan fiction is actually part of the canon and what is not. So what is the official story? But
Fiddle.
whenever we ask the question, what is the official story? That's a certain body of individuals who claim that they have authority to determine what the official story is. Um, and that maybe they're actually right or maybe they're actually wrong. Like, we don't know
Do you have a
because
similar opinion on the Buddha? Sorry to interrupt. Do you think like he's equally vague?
here we definitely have similar issues, but it's also important to recognize that, um, first of all, Jesus didn't actually establish anything. And that's just really important to note. Because again, the first thing that we have is just a collection of sayings that were attributed to Jesus. But Jesus himself did not establish a program or a church or a doctrine. Like, all of that came later. which I think just amplifies sort of the historical nebulousness. Like we don't know because Jesus didn't do anything like that. What we do have in Buddhism is we definitely do have the construction of a new religious movement that created itself in opposition to the Vedic Brahmanical tradition within Indian culture. So
Ah.
somebody started that.
Mm.
Now, it's interesting. Like when we actually get into what is the historical story of the story of the Buddha and the founder of the Jain religion, those two stories are fundamentally identical. And
Oh.
in fact, we can look at the biography of a lot of different religious figures coming out of India, and many of them actually have the same story. So some modern historians say, well, we think that there was this historical figure and that one branch off of that historical figure became the Jain religion, and then another branch off of that became Buddhism.
Right.
But it was that Mahavira and Buddha are actually the same person. But if you go to Buddhists, they'll say, no, Buddha is Buddha. And you go to Jains, Jains will say, no, Mahavira was Mahavira. And then even later, we have the rise of Vaishnavite Hinduism. And they said, well, actually, Buddha was just Vishnu in disguise. So really, Buddhism isn't a separate religion. This is actually Hinduism. And so it gets reincorporated that way. But yeah, there are historical questions like, what do we really know about these people? But I think, again, that in Buddhism, I think we have a very different case because um, somebody started a very new kind of religious tradition in India and built up structures around that we can very clearly identify. Like this is the Buddhist tradition. Versus again, in Christianity, there was no Christian church established by Jesus. There were no Christian practices. And in fact, in early Christianity, what we see is just a wide degree of diversity among different groups that claimed to be Christian and had, again, radically different interpretations of who Jesus was. Keep in mind, even some early Christian groups said Jesus is not a person. He's
Mm.
a spiritual figure, but he's not a historical person. He was never born. So he couldn't even be crucified because he's not a real person. He's not a physical person. And then, like, if we go into Taoism in China, this is another one where we've got Lao Tzu, and from a historical perspective, we don't really have the ability to say like who was Lao Tzu or was he even really a person? But somebody wrote the Tao Te Ching, so somebody wrote it.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
we know that somebody started it or
Right.
did that somewhere. But we historically we can't really say anything with certainty about who Lao Tzu
Right.
may or may not have been. And it's a different case with Confucius because Confucius was he was actually a registered member of the royal uh, court and educational program. But anyway,
It's very funny to me that people really get hung up on this stuff about the significance of what physically did or did not take place. And to me, it's just if the teaching holds any water, that is what it's all about. And like I can give some personal examples. Like I was quitting kratom, which is this opiate adjacent tea, rather mild, but I was very physically dependent on it, and I had my own meditation retreat to basically detox from it, and I was just in a massive amount of physical pain, just unbearable levels. And I was meditating through this, and it was just absolutely unbearable to meditate. And what came to me was a part of the Jesus story where he was being crucified, and he's, you know, says to God, Father, why have you forsaken me? And then that's followed by the moment of surrender where he says, "Thy will be done," just accepting the situation
yeah.
unconditionally. And in this context, this story was very personally helpful to me. I don't really care whether or not he was physically alive. That's of no consequence to me. And I think humans just have this tendency to get really caught up on all the trivia and like and not getting to the substance of the matter.
So it might as well have been Harry Potter on the cross.
Absolutely.
what you're saying. I could,
Yeah, he's just
yeah.
not
Sure.
divinized in the same way, by our culture. So
Yeah.
like that's not where my subconscious goes to. But you can use Superman if you want.
Right.
It could be
So
anything.
essentially, what is important and worth taking away from these stories is just the moral of them, and the message is what you're saying, and the inspiration that they can bring. In
Yeah, that if people want to be, quote, inspired by Jesus, I think that's great. I mean, there's certain elements of his story that I think are very powerful, and that as human beings, we make sense of our experience of reality by telling stories. It's a fundamental part of being a human being. And so we are evolutionarily primed to resonate with what we now in modern psychological language call like archetypes and mythological tropes, that we've been telling ourselves stories about reality ever since human beings could first talk, essentially, that we've been telling stories. So we are psychologically evolutionary primed to resonate with these dramatic events within these stories, and that they become archetypal and they become guideposts for us. And it allows us, by seeing our experience reflected in a story, it allows us to make meaning of our experience. And this is primarily a function of the ego, that the ego is a meaning junkie. It wants to know, what does that mean? What does that mean? What does
yeah.
that mean? What does that mean? And
Absolutely, in every way.
yeah, so when we are confronted with our own suffering, having a story that helps us make sense of it. And I would even say, Helgi, this is where we go back to energy, that by contemplating the story and the message and meaning behind the story, it allows an energetic shift within yourself to be at more peace with whatever process is happening within you.
Mhm.
And so that's the power of the story. And we don't, so the metaphysical religious belief might be, oh, Helgi, and then that was the power of the Holy Spirit reaching down and touching you and filling you with the power of Jesus that brought that sense of relief.
Right.
But I would say
I'm
no,
aware
actually, it's
enough not
just,
to fall into that.
yeah, it's an internal shift that
Yeah.
allows you to be with whatever your experience is in a way that now you're able to make meaning of it and provide you with a sense of being able to trust and relax within that. And that shifts how you're then moving through that process.
Okay, I'm gonna play devil's advocate for a second.
Okay.
I'm gonna bring it back to what you believe creates your reality. What would actually be the difference? Like, what difference does it make? Essentially, is my question. Whether it was, whether it was the spirit of Jesus coming and changing your perception of reality in a positive way, or just the magnificence or the force of the story itself and its message. Like, what, I can't quite tell
Mm.
why it's significant which one of those it was. And if you want to choose one over the other, if you want to believe it was God, like I understand being scientifically accurate and you can't go around talking being full of shit all the time, like our friend Trump, of course. Like when you're making political I'm thinking as I go here, obviously, but when you're making decisions of real geopolitical consequence, then yes, be scrupulous. But it's like in case of a very personal thing like that, like what difference does it actually make? And I would extend that actually to ask you if you would try to convince, do you try to convince people that that's not actually what happened? Um, and to kind of, that's what I'm kind of reading into what you've said so far, is that you don't encourage going that path of interpreting it in a way that is not um, measurable, let's say, or not provable. And you'd rather stick to the facts of,
Yeah.
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 Okay.
So you're asking these multi-layered questions, and there's so many different ways to go about
Yeah,
answering them.
I'm
So
sorry.
maybe just starting with the last bit is, yeah, I'm actually always um, hoping to steer people back to, let's go back to what we know, because what I see is my overall objective of the quote, the work that I do is I want to help people find inner clarity within themselves so that they can lead a more integrated, authentic, and grounded life.
Right.
And anything that might prevent them from doing that. It's like, I don't go out of my way to tell people, like, don't believe that shit. But again, if somebody comes to me and they want to have an integration call with me and they say, hey, I think I felt the power of Jesus, um, I'm going to try and help them see that maybe this was some power of your own and not some external force that was coming outside of you.
Which is
Um,
intrinsically more empowering than
Yeah.
actually, right?
yes.
Is that the point you were coming to? Sorry.
Yeah. So I've got an example. This was just the other week of this woman who had been having some very powerful reactivations from her 5-MeO DMT experience. And one of these reactivations was she woke up around 2 or 3 in the morning, which is fairly typical. And she said that her heart exploded and she felt this overwhelming sense of unconditional love. And she felt it was a two-way street. It was going out and it was coming back at the same time. And she said that she herself, she was not religious, but she was raised by Christian parents who believed in the Holy Ghost and the Holy Spirit and all of that. And that as her mind was trying to process this experience, she's like, I think I'm feeling the heart of Jesus. And so then after that, she started thinking, so maybe that means I need to be Christian. Maybe I should go back and read the Bible. Maybe I should, rejoin the church. And then at a later point, she caught herself and she said, you know what? I think that's just my ego trying to make meaning and trying to create identifiable characters within the story of my direct experience. But actually, it's just me.
Mm-hmm.
And she said,
Yeah.
and then when I realized that, I went, and she had already purchased my book in Theogenic Liberation. So then I picked her book back up and I read that's exactly what you talked about in your book. And then I reached out to have a call with you because I want to talk to you about this. So that's the point. That
That's awesome.
later realization is way more empowering for her than, oh, so I'm going to put my whole identity and belief into Jesus and follow up on all of this stuff. So that by finding clarity within ourselves, we're actually empowering ourselves rather than we are giving our power away or disidentifying from our immediate lived experience.
Mm.
Right. It's also just so much more simple not to create this elaborate stories about what it means.
But simple is boring, Helgi.
Right, but that goes back to my point that the ego is a meaning addict.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I want more meaning, more, give me more, give me more, give me more.
Because it's more fun. Right?
It is, except that in the long run, it actually isn't more fun. So let's just go back to Terence McKenna again with like all the stuff with the machine elves and the UFOs and the aliens in 2012 and all of that. And yeah, he's a poet, he's an entertainer. He's a lot of fun to listen to, though I do find his voice a bit grating. But he's a lot of fun.
Same.
But then when we look at Terence McKenna himself, he was paralyzed by fear for the last 15 years of his life. And so then like it's not fun. And so I would want to look at like, well, where did he give away his own power?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, this really touches on what I wanted to talk about way earlier in the podcast, and that's this topic of immersion. And I used to play video games a lot when I was younger, and then I tried again now when I was older, and I just was not able to do it because I was too aware that this is a game and it's set up in a certain way to hijack my dopamine system and all of this. I'm too aware of the process to the point that I'm not able to immerse myself in it. And it seems to me that what God is engaged in is this process of losing itself in its own illusion. And that is also what God wants to experience. That there's something gained when you're watching a movie from really forgetting that you're a person watching a movie. So like I get why God would want to have the experience of being Terence McKenna and really not knowing what all these machine elves are and all of that. So yeah, I'm curious what your thoughts are on that topic.
Well, I think that that's a fundamental statement that when you have the non-dual experience, the sense of, oh shit, it's all one and it's actually me and it's always been me, that there's also a certain sense of deep, deep existential loneliness within
Mm-hmm.
that. And it is by thoroughly investing our sense of self into dualistic embodied reality that we are able to experience a sense of meaning, a sense of connection, a sense of exploration, a sense of otherness, and that is satisfying. And that it's what I like to say is that the phenomenal reality that we live in is God's response to the eternal existential loneliness of being the one. Like this is the response, and that this is how God responds to itself.
Mm.
Of shit, it's just me for eternity. So what am I going to do? I'm going to divide myself and I'm going to forget myself and I'm just going to invest myself in the experience of being because there isn't anything else to do. And otherwise, it actually is, in a very, very deep sense, profoundly lonely. And it's by um, really investing in that temporal experience of that little window between birth and death of like, I get to experience this and I get to do whatever it is that I get to do in this little time period, that even the dissolution of that death is what brings meaning to all experience in life, because it highlights the fact that it's all just temporary. It's just a temporary appearance within the vast ocean of phenomenon.
So
And by, yeah, go ahead.
you don't necessarily think of the enlightened state, the state of ego death or oneness. You don't think of that necessarily as something that's higher or more meta, as we said before, or somehow better or higher up in the hierarchy, or however you want to put it, as opposed to our normal egoic experience, the one most human beings are accustomed to.
Yeah. Only in the sense that it brings clarity.
Yeah.
And then hopefully we apply that clarity to the lived experience. But here's where I fundamentally disagree with the religious or spiritual metaphysics that say, well, but by becoming enlightened, you will ascend to a higher level of awareness and then you reside within that realm and you are no longer impacted by the phenomenal realm. And it's like, that is just a story that the ego is telling. That is
Right.
just a projection of the ego that is trying to claim some sense of specialness for itself. And so, no, I don't put it above and beyond. And that really it's about, if I go to the heart of what is my experience of being, it's the non-dual experience. That is absolutely, unquestionably, obviously the heart of experience. But because it's so rare to have that experience, that most people never have it. And so they're not able to have that experience of, we could just call it divine clarity of, oh, this is what is. This is how what is interacting with itself.
Mm.
But once we've had that experience, it introduces a certain level of clarity so that then so much of the ego is built up around fear, protection, overcoming pain, overcoming trauma, and is built in with judgment and restriction and censorship, and sometimes in severe cases, even like severe self-loathing and self-hatred. But by coming to a point of clarity, we can learn how to let go of those deficiencies that we have built into our sense of self so that
Mm.
we can more fully live within the structures that we have been granted as an embodied being. And that we can't just believe our way out of it. Like, we can't just say, well, like I always point this one out, like, man, if I could just believe that this hair were not thinning,
You and me,
man, I would
brother.
be so on top of that one. It's like,
Yeah,
come on,
yeah, yeah.
because I mean, yeah, it's vanity, right? It's like, I don't want to be bald. Um, but if I could just like choose to, like, no, I have more hair. But that's the thing, is that if somebody did that, we tell them like, dude, you're being delusional.
Okay.
Like, why are you
Yeah.
investing your energy in a losing proposition?
Yes, yes, but
I just want to bring this one out because I don't know if this is true or not, but I had a client who was going to Joe Dispenza's workshops,
uh,
and she kind of hit this point where she's like, I think it's kind of bullshit what Joe Dispenza is doing. because he's all about believe your way into whatever you fucking want to manifest. And I've had my own issues with Joe Dispenza, but she said, well, if Joe Dispenza really can heal anything just through the power of belief and concentration, why does he have hair plugs?
Right.
My point exactly.
Yes, your God has bled.
Yeah.
Instead of blood, you got hair plugs. Um, my kind of pushback on that would be maybe Joe Dispenza can't do it, but maybe Jesus could.
Okay, and my pushback on that is like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, I mean, seriously, like,
No, I'm talking about like if a being really does attain the state of oneness, however you want to, I don't know, what do we call this?
yeah,
Do you even think that Jesus, or
I
supposing that
think
he
that's kind
existed?
of a flawed way to put it because oneness is not something that's attained. It is essentially
Okay,
who you
anyway,
are.
what I'm saying is maybe we don't have definitive proof that you can't get to the point where you could do that.
Right.
Is what I'm saying. Oh yeah.
and we also don't have any evidence that anyone can do that at any level. So I mean, that's like saying, well, we don't have definitive proof that there aren't unicorns on the dark side of the moon. It's like, yeah, but why would I believe that in the first place? Like,
They're
there's
so
no
cute.
point to
Right.
believing that there
Okay.
are unicorns on the dark
Oh,
side of
yeah,
the moon.
I think
But
Helge
And
has
here's
something.
my point on this also is that
okay,
okay, like being a human is a fundamental restriction, and your infinite power as God is localized and restricted into this finite form, and with that come a lot of limitations. If you want to transcend those limitations, you basically have to stop being a human being and become God. As God, you can do anything, but that's not necessarily going to affect this particular vehicle of God. So you
Yeah.
can
right.
go into a
And
God state and you can imagine infinite realities and have these crazy experiences, but that's not the individual having some kind of special power. That's a power of God.
Right.
right. And I would say that here we want to make a really important distinction that when we, as the embodied perspective, enter into the more rarefied God state and we are in the divine imagination, anything is possible within the divine imagination. And God can do anything that it can do within the divine imagination. But the physical embodied reality in which we live, it operates according to rules. And here, God has to operate within the rules of the system. And so they're actually, in order for anything to be, God had to institute limits upon itself so that it could then transform into what we experience as reality. And here, we actually do have the possibility to potentially do anything that we want to do, but we have to work within the rules of the system. I like to say that is what we call science and technology. We're
Right.
working within the rules of the system.
Yeah.
And so then,
Absolutely.
therefore, how can God get more hair on the head of Joe Dispenza?
Yeah.
Hair plugs.
Right.
That's how it works.
Right. And it's so funny. This reminds me of a story from Leo Gura where he said he was going through an experience of 5-Meo and he was standing across from this glass and he said, okay, I'm going to go Jedi mode and I'm going to lift this glass. And then he realized the way God lifts this glass is he uses an arm.
Yeah.
Ah. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
arms are miracles in and of themselves, to be fair.
Yeah.
Yes. And we
And
tend to denigrate like the physical or so-called physical aspects of ourselves. Like we trivialize them and make them somehow less divine.
Yeah,
yeah. And
true.
so that's kind of like the story of um, the person who's stranded on his roof and there's a flood and he's praying to God to come save me. And then a dude comes up in a boat and says, hey, you want to get in the boat? And he's like, no, I'm waiting for God to save me. Oh, okay. So the guy in the boat goes on. And then someone comes up in a helicopter. It's like, hey, do you want to climb up into the helicopter? No, I'm waiting for God to save me. And then the helicopter flies away. And then, a bunch of other stuff happens. And every time the guy's like, yeah, I'm waiting for God to save me. So then the guy dies, goes up to heaven, sees God, and it's like, God, why hath thou forsaken me? Why did you abandon me there on the roof? It's like, dude, I fucking sent you a boat, I sent you a helicopter.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
what more do you
yeah,
want? You know? And then going back to the like the Jesus thing, like, well, if Jesus could do anything he wanted, then why did he let himself die on the cross? I mean, it doesn't make any sense to say, well, Jesus is like this completely realized being, yet he died. And then supposedly Buddha was a completely realized being, and he died from food poisoning. So, like, dude, you fucking failed. Like, look at that. You should have lived forever. Um, but all of those, see, that's just the human egoic response to the horror of our mortality. This idea, like, well, if I just believe hard enough, or if I become spiritually enlightened enough that I will never get sick and I will never die, it's like bullshit. Find me one person who's managed to avoid dying.
yeah.
God.
Okay. I said person.
Yeah, I know. I'm being funny, but yeah, that's not possible.
So
Huh.
yeah, I don't buy it. I don't buy it. I don't buy the idea that somehow, quote, enlightenment comes with magical fucking powers. Like, don't buy it.
But
Don't
it
buy
is
it.
but it is pretty inherently magical though, the reality that we live in. I mean, just the fact that there is something as opposed to nothing, isn't that freaking just awesome in and
I
of
know,
itself?
but see, people get numb to it, and they think like, oh, I want superpowers. I want amazing spiritual abilities. Like, I mean, that's a phrase I've been using for a long time. It's like, dude, reality is like magical enough as it is. I mean,
Yeah.
just when you really think about it, it's pretty damn amazing. And in contrary to the idea of like, oh, there's some other spiritual realm where things are totally groovy, like I always like to say, like, look, this is where the party's happening. It's like right here. Like
Mm.
Yeah,
this is it. This is it.
right.
And that's
And like, yeah,
that's also what I think the power of the 5-MeO experience reveals is like, oh my God, this really is it. Like whatever it is that I'm experiencing, like this is what God is doing. Like fully invested in like this is it
Mm.
right here. So there isn't anywhere else.
it's
There's
so
nowhere to
funny that
go. There's
a,
nothing to achieve.
Yeah.
a lot of people relate to non-duality in a very dualistic manner.
Right.
Like it's some other place, it's some other
Wait, what?
experience, and non actually when you really uh, have the non-dual experience, it isn't anywhere else but right here,
Right.
and there is no place to escape to. And a lot of religion is based on this idea that like there's some other realm that is the spirit realm, there's some transcendent state you have to get to. It's always outside of yourself, and there's usually somebody else who can help you get there, who you have to pay,
Right.
Mm.
and it's
Yeah.
So,
under your authority too.
Yeah.
mm.
And that's where I like to use the term of radical non-duality, where in articulating my non-dual view, I have always said, look, this is not about being spiritual. This is not a religious statement. This is not in support of any religious position or philosophy. That the radically non-dual experience is to realize this is it right here, right now. And that this is just how things actually are. And it's nothing that can be achieved. It's the heart of experience right here, right now. So it's available in any moment, in any interaction. And what that helps me bring to like this conversation right here is this sense of, well, there's three different dudes sitting around talking to each other, but really what we have is three different characters through which this one universal consciousness and being is interacting with itself through the vehicles of these different bodies that are located in different positions in space-time. And the really cool thing is that it's just one being interacting with itself through these different characters, and that we get the privilege of being these characters and experiencing ourselves as these characters. And so that we each leave our own unique individual life with our own unique individual experiences. And that's a fucking miracle. It's amazing.
Yeah.
But the itness of reality, it's right here, right now. It's
Mm.
not somewhere else.
What do you think about lighter dose experiences of psychedelics versus the true oneness? Because in my experience, taking um, let's say, I don't even know how many grams of I'd say between 5 and 10 grams of mushrooms, perhaps, on a journey I went on.
That's not
Um,
lead, man.
Oh no, I mean,
Up to Kalindi E, that's
it's
light,
like
but
it's like
Yeah.
compared to the state this guy's describing, it's like I definitely didn't go into like I'm coming to realize through this conversation and through checking you out before this interview that I have never had that true oneness experience, which is interesting to me because I definitely did think that I had. So thanks for clarifying that.
it's possible to get
Um,
close.
Yeah.
yeah, but I was gonna say those experiences were still tremendously important and helpful in helping me realize that like more or less exactly what you were saying, right? That this is it. This is it. Here you go. This is reality. And it's actually really freaking fascinating because of course the psilocybin, I don't know if I'm describing this in the correct scientific terms now, but what it seems to do experientially is just shut down certain systems in the brain that put labels on stuff that you see during the psychedelic experience, or during everyday life. And you no longer have these labels automatically attached to everything that you're seeing. So you might be looking at the same window you see every day and you still don't realize exactly what it is because it's always changing. And you're seeing it,
Right.
it's like in a sense it's being distorted, but in a different sense it's simultaneously you're just seeing it for what it actually is, which you haven't done for the longest time because your brain has automatically categorized it as just one of a million windows you see every day. But this window, look at the little groove over here on the
Yeah.
glass,
Yeah.
you know, and like, whoa, it's like, whoa. So just psychedelic experiences like that, I think, are tremendously helpful as well. So I'd like to hear your take on like the difference between the applications of something like that and something like the experience of true oneness, and perhaps even give me some directions on where I can have one of these experiences.
Yeah. So, um, when we're talking about psychedelics, I think it's always important to keep in mind that there are lots of applications for psychedelics. There's no like singular use or singular purpose, and that as human beings are predisposed to psychedelic substances. I mean, human beings have been using and exploring psychedelics for a long, 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 long time, and it's a fundamental part of being a human being. And humans have used psychedelics for spiritual purposes. They've used it for hunting. They've used it for art. They've used it for music. They've used it for sex and sexuality. They've used psychedelics for purposes of war and combat, and for purposes of self-realization. So there's a wide variety. There's no, like, again, there's no single use of psychedelics. And there is the ability to just take a little bit of a psychedelic and have a little bit of an altered experience, and then you can go really, really deep, and sometimes you can go, oh fuck, I think that was too deep, bail myself out. And then there is the rarity of the clarified epiphany of the non-dual experience, which again does not happen on most psychedelics most of the time, because the ego is very resilient. Like even the ego getting fascinated by the window. I mean, that's still the ego fascinated by the window. Like, whoa, fucking check this out. Like
Exactly.
this is
That's
really cool.
that's the realization I've been having these past couple of days as I've been listening to podcasts you've done and stuff. I've been like, damn, I haven't had this oneness thing. Damn, it was always the ego. Even when I thought I was my friend, that was still my ego. You know,
Yeah,
it's like I thought
yeah,
I was
because there's
somebody else, but I was just a
But it's at
different ego.
various
Uh,
levels of density, I'd say.
what do you mean?
So you can be condensed just within your body, and then you
yeah,
can merge with your friend. That's still a constrained level of identity, but it's loosened ever so slightly. And
Yeah.
then with 5-Meo, what happens is just like pops it like a balloon.
Uh,
yeah,
That is what's so like effective and convenient about it, is because it's so much easier just to get straight to the point. And this was my experience when I did it. It's like, wow, this is so much less trouble than all the other psychedelics.
yeah,
this is so, this is so much simpler. I
Yeah,
mean, it sounds simpler at least.
there's not this process of like, oh, I'm almost letting go, but I'm afraid. I'm not sure. I jump off the cliff, and it just cuts past that, and that is very
yeah,
useful and convenient.
yeah.
Mm.
So for me, for my very first full 5-MeO experience, my my takeaway from it, like the immediate aftermath was, holy shit, this is exactly what I've been looking for my entire life, but had no idea that this was what I was looking for my entire life, because this was the point of clarity around which now everything else, this is the standard against which everything else is going to be measured. And then prior to that, I was like, ooh, look at that. Look at that. What about this? What about this? What about this? Oh, maybe there, maybe there. Oh, let's go over here. So there's this constant questing, this constant seeking. And then this was just like, no, this is it. Like, you went looking for it. This is it. And then everything else falls into perspective from that immovable point.
I really
And
want to touch on some stuff here, but you can finish.
so this is where clarity enters into the picture. And then what people find is that after that, for most people, their experience of psychedelics in general radically shifts. And they start to see and understand it in a new way. And not only their experience of psychedelics, but their experience of everyday embodied lived reality. There's a new ground of being that has been uncovered. And as Helgi said earlier, this is just revealed. It's not created, it's not attained, it's not achieved. It's just, oh no, this is the way everything's always been.
Yeah.
I was just constantly dancing around this reality. I was always maybe on the edge. And that within deep psychedelic experiences, with most other psychedelics, what we tend to get is what I like to call non-duality within duality, where there's an expansive sense of self, but there's still the appearance of subject and object. So people tend to say, oh, I felt like I was one with everything, or we were all one family, we were all together. And so there is a sense of unitary nature, but it's still presented through the guise of, well, there's me and everything else, and we're all one together, versus the peak of the 5-MeO experience is not we're all one together. It's, oh, fuck, it's just me. And I don't mean the human being. I mean the unitary infinite nature of consciousness and beingness is like, it's all me. It's not, I'm not one with everything. I am everything, and I always have been everything. Eternally, infinitely. There is only the universal self. And then the ego can react to that. It can say like, yay, or like, oh my God, that's so fucking scary. Or what am I supposed to do about that? Or what can I do about that? Or then what does it mean for me as the person that I am? So it's not exactly something that's easy to absorb. But that's the upshot, is just that sense of, whoa, it really is all radically one forever.
Yeah. Yeah. On that topic of kind of duality and non-duality, I think it's also possible to have certain perhaps shallower experience of non-duality on what would not quite be a oneness experience, but a duality within, no, non-duality within duality, you said, right?
Yeah.
Like
Right.
I remember very distinctly a moment during a psychedelic during a psilocybin ceremony where I thought, where I intuitively knew in my feelings, my feelings were telling me that there is no such thing as winning or losing. Like it's all just
Yeah.
the just really strong realization. It wasn't quite the depth that you just described, but it was the same kind of thing. So that's yeah, checks out with what I've experienced. What were you gonna say, Huggy? Sorry.
I mean, I was just gonna touch on this fact of like when you go into the non-dual state, it can almost be like skipping to the credits
Oh
in
yeah.
that movie. And there can be a disappointment to that for the ego. And this brings me back to Terence McKenna. It's like um, I often got the sense that he was engaged in this activity of existential edging. Like he just didn't want to go all the way because he just preferred the tension of almost knowing, but he didn't want to reveal, he didn't want to give all the game away. But I did notice certain moments when he talks that he's like, oh, you almost gave it away. And it's almost like his subconscious was aware of this process. So yeah, this is what I'm grappling with. Is like God is obviously seeking to uh, have this experience of separation, and it's also seeking to reunify with itself. But there's something lost when you just skip to the credits. And that this sense that you were talking about of being on this quest is actually what makes the game interesting.
Yeah, it's like why didn't the eagles just fly the ring into Mordor?
Right.
Yeah,
It wouldn't have made
yeah.
for a fun story.
And also the spiritual notion of I I intend to reside in oneness forever. Once I achieve it, I just want to reside there forever. Um, I think that that's actually the opposite of like Terence McKenna's edging of the oneness, because then that's just saying, oh, I'm just going to cop out. So, and that's a standard spiritual model that's been promoted for thousands of years. The idea of, oh, you're going to be the enlightened saint that sits in the cave in meditation. Once you've attained enlightenment, now you're going to sit in meditation for the rest of your life and you're not going to do jack shit. You're not going to have any friends. You're not going to have a job. You're not going to have family. You're not going to have kids. You're not going to invest yourself in samsara or the world of illusion, because now you just want to transcend and move beyond. And so that's the other side of the coin, which I am completely and thoroughly uninterested in, because I'm always interested in the question of how do we embody and live in the reality of the oneness from a place that is grounded, authentic, in presence. And then I'm living my life from that. But I'm not just, oh, well, so I'm going to just sit in meditative quiescence for the rest of my
That's
time.
also
It's
so
like,
escapist. It's like the spiritual equivalent of doing heroin.
yeah, yeah. It's like, I just want to be blessed out all the time, man. Like, don't harsh my mellow.
I mean, yeah, I guess then there are examples of people who sit around meditating in the street all day, right? I mean,
I
it's
mean,
it's
Yeah.
a
And like,
there's more
thing.
and
choice.
what's,
You can do that if you want.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I look at it as we have a very brief window of this amazing gift of getting to be the human being that we are. And that window is between birth and death. And for me personally, in that time period, I want to record as much music as I can. I want to write as many books as I can. I want to take as many photographs as I can. I want to go on as many ventures with my wife and my son and my kids as I can. And I want to do as much as I can, because there's only a certain amount of time that I get to do any of this in. And yeah, the oneness is great and it's beautiful and it's totally amazing. And I'm really glad that I've had enough of those experiences that I can really center it into my being and make that the foundation of my life. But I am not at all interested in spending all my time
Right.
there, because that would just be a waste of my
Right.
time as the being that I am.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Also, it's coming regardless.
Yeah,
So like you're gonna go there. Like, why would you waste your life just doing that?
yeah, yeah. Again, it's just a waste. It's like, oh, all right, you want to sit on your butt the whole time? Oh, okay, I'd rather go on a hike.
That's just personal preference. Some people really like, and it's very valid and useful to sit on your butt, um, just to ground that sense, that non-dual sense into your everyday life. Because the way most people engage with everyday life is actually very divorced from this sense of non-dual understanding, and they just get
Yeah,
completely caught up in it. So it's very important to have to go into that state actually. Um, but if you
yeah,
just want to dwell there, it's like that's again getting into this dualistic non-duality territory.
yeah. And that's where, I mean, I'm not interested in being a spiritual guru. Like, so I don't teach people like, yeah, go meditate, like go do that. I'm more interested in helping people in that process of, how do I, if I if I've had this experience, how do I ground it into the things that I want to do? And again, if yeah, that means if you want to meditate, well, that's you can go do that. Um, but there's other models for that. Like, well, then go be a Buddhist or go be a Hindu, or whatever, you know, do that. But for me, that's not what radical non-duality is actually about. It's about living it freely, without the structures of needing to be in meditation or be in any state at any given time. Like, this is a question that people ask me a lot. Like, oh, well, if you've had this liberation and enlightenment, are you just in that state of oneness all the time? And I always tell them, like, well, no, you don't get any shit done when you're in the state of oneness. Like,
You can't even
um,
survive.
yeah, yeah, like you literally can't survive. So I'm more interested in how do I bring that into whatever it is that I'm actually doing.
God is a hobo. You heard it here first. God
Yeah.
can't couldn't even sit the right way on a toilet seat. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when you have no sense of self, you don't even know where to put the food. So it's very inconvenient. And there's a
Yeah.
reason why our bodies metabolize the DMT so fast. Because like if it didn't, we were just in the DMT or 5-MeO state all the time. Like humans could not have gotten to this point. It's just like not convenient for survival purposes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Huh. I can't. I want to bring this back to the word music right now. I can't believe it took us 2 hours to get there. Not that I want to say anything in particular about music. I just thought that was hilarious, and I wanted to point out that we've been going for quite a while, and I feel bad about keeping you for
How's
a
your
very
time,
long,
Martin?
Martin.
Yeah, well, I haven't actually eaten anything yet today, so I gotta get something to eat at some point. I
Yeah.
gotta put my podcast together for tomorrow morning, so I got stuff to do, but I've been enjoying the conversation. It's been a lot of fun.
I have one thing that I
Same.
really do want to ask, but I'm happy to end with music as well.
No, you go for it. You go for it.
Okay,
I didn't have anything good.
so this is my thought experiment.
Okay.
Bringing it back to our good friend Trump. So,
Ugh.
given that he would be open to it, which he would not be unless you would taunt him, if you
Aggie,
gave
where the
5-MeO,
heck are you going with this?
if you gave 5-MeO DMT to Trump when you were active practitioner, what would have happened?
Man. Man.
Woo!
Well, first of all, keep in mind I've always been in the position that you can't really predict how anybody's going to react. And
Right.
that this is why in my model of serving people 5-MeO DMT, I like to say that the first big hit is what we call the diagnostic round, meaning that it's like if somebody agrees to take 5-MeO DMT, if you ask them, like, do you want to let go? They'll say, sure. Like, do you want to have the full experience of the infinite ecstatic orgasm of being? They'll say, oh yeah, yeah, I definitely want that. Um, and do you feel that you are ready to completely trust? Oh yeah, definitely. So at the surface level, everybody will say that if they're going to agree to take 5-MeO. And if they're like, oh, I'm not sure, then you know, they'll probably choose like, oh, well, maybe I don't want to do this. But just because people say that doesn't mean that that's how they're actually going to respond when confronted with, and this is where it's very important, going back to the ego death idea, that when 5-MeO starts, within a few seconds, the ego will be fundamentally convinced, oh shit, I've done it now. And like, there's no coming back from this. So it really does present as you are dying, you're being absorbed into the cosmic fabric, and there will be no return from this event. And it presents that way consistently. And it's in that crucial moment where there is a wide spectrum of things that might take place. And it's only a limited percentage of people that actually will completely let go and let that experience unfold without any sense of resistance. And it's not a conscious choice that people are able to make. You can't say, yeah, I'm going to consciously choose to let go at all my unconscious levels. But for some people, they are ready, and so they do that. But with a lot of people, the conscious part might not ever let go. And so people can fight with it all the way through. Oh God, make it stop. Please, please make it stop. Oh my God, I'm so afraid. Right? That's a possibility. Then the conscious levels can let go. And then there might be all kinds of unconscious patternings that play themselves out. And here is where I'd say, again, you can't make a prediction, but I think that there is so much unconscious shit happening with Trump like all the time. And he projects out so consistently, and he is such a pathological liar that I think he has a very complex architecture of bullshit deeply embedded within his being that goes back to his childhood. And I also think that fundamentally, um, I don't think he likes himself. I think that he
Yeah.
probably really, really hates himself. And I think he's really afraid of himself. So I think that there's some really deep seated hatreds and deep seated fears and traumas within him. And so I would imagine, I mean, again, I cannot make an accurate prediction because you never know. People surprise you. I was like, whoa, fucking Trump did great. Look at that. Like he went all the way into the cosmic orgasm. Like, go Trump. That's possible. But I think the likelihood is that he would have a very difficult time, and
Yes.
it would be more akin to if people imagine like what an exorcism is like.
Yeah.
It'd be more like that
Purging for
first.
sure.
That's what I would anticipate. That I think it'd be very difficult, very traumatic, extremely terrifying for him, very, very difficult. I don't imagine that it would be easy for him, but it might also be deeply clarifying for him because um, a huge part of Trump's ego and persona relies on othering at a very, very deep level, meaning that those people are bad. I hate those people. They're animals. They're vermin. They're less than human. They're terrorists. They're evil. They're Satan worshipers. Um, and it's not coming from a place of clarity. It's not coming from a place of compassion. It's not coming from a place of rigorous intellectual understanding. It's all emotionally
Fear.
reactive
Mm.
and really reflective of a very weak psychological and emotional system that informs his embodied sense of being. So, I mean, he's a fucking mess. He's an energetic mess. He's a disaster as a human being. And this confrontation with the God nature of his own being, I think would be deeply traumatic and very, very difficult for him. But I would also hope that it could bring him to a place of really recognizing his own heart and his own deficiencies that he has amplified and projected out onto the national and international stage, and that it could potentially be deeply healing for him, um, and could benefit the world. So
So we should do this. Let's
yeah,
start a movement. Make Trump
Yeah.
do 5-MeO.
yeah,
Make
But
okay.
it would be better if this was just part of the system. Like if you want to become president, sorry, you have to do mandatory couple 5-MeO sessions. And I
Mandatory.
think that would solve a lot of stuff, to be fair.
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm Helgi, are you one of the subscribers to the idea that everybody should get a heroic dose snuck into their lunch on the
No.
same day? Okay, no. All right.
I mean, this is the old hippie idea. They wanted to put LSD in the water supply. It's highly idealistic and it assumes that people all react in a predictable and positive manner. It's just far more unpredictable than
Yeah,
that.
some people
And
are gonna have some exorcism purging
just they're
situations
not
going on.
equipped if they don't have people to really assist them to that.
I, Lord knows I've been
Yeah,
there.
and especially when it comes to 5-MeO DMT, one of the things I always like to emphasize is that um, I really want it to be everybody's choice. That I'm of the
Yeah.
position that I do think that the 5-MeO DMT experience should be made available to anyone who says that they want it. I think that it's our human birthright. But within that, acknowledging that actually it can be very difficult and very traumatic for people. And I always want it to be people's choice. And ideally, in my world, people should educate themselves about it first, not afterwards. That's like it's too late. At that point, educate yourself about it first, inform yourself so that you can make an educated decision. And then if you want it for yourself, then I think that you have a fundamental human right to do that. But I don't think anyone should ever try and convince anybody else to take 5-MeO. And I don't think that anybody should take it just because they're curious or because somebody suggested to them that they take it or thought that it might be a good idea. That it's really, I think everybody should walk into it in a state of fully informed consent, and that they're making the decision fully and consciously for themselves on their own, because it's just too monumental to
Yeah.
like, hey, I snuck it in there, or well, I'm doing it because my roommate convinced me to do it, or something like that, or my husband or my wife convinced me to do it. It's like you've got to want it,
Yeah.
because
It's heavy duty stuff. People don't know what they're
it's
getting into.
yeah, it's big, 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 big,
So
big, big.
read
You have
Entheogenic
you have
Liberation.
no idea. You have no
Did,
idea how big it is.
wait, yeah, no, apparently not. Martin, do you get a lot of people to? Sorry, this will be one of the absolute last questions. Now we'll wrap this up very soon. But
Unless you really want to touch on music, that's also
no, let's not go there. You do that another time. But three musicians. I can't believe it took this long. Anyway, um, do you have a lot? Because you used to do ceremonies, right? You used to hold, whatever you want to call it. You used to hold
Sessions.
space sessions.
Sessions.
Sorry, you used to hold space for people who were going through this experience, and now you do consultations, right?
Mhm.
And so, do you get a lot of people right now in your consultation practice who come to you just a mess, who are just like who didn't, as you said, or as you would recommend, do their research beforehand, and they had this horrible experience, and now they're at your door, like, what the hell? I like, yeah,
Yeah. Well, first keep in mind, like, you can have a really difficult time even if you've done all the research. So that, like, preparation is no determination of outcome with
right,
5-MeO DMT. It's too big. It's something that can't be controlled. Um, and it's important to recognize that a lot of people who reach out to me, they're doing it because they're confused or scared or having a difficult time, so that they are disproportionately represented in terms of who's reaching out to me. So, for example, these days, a lot of people who facilitate 5-MeO DMT offer integration services for people that they work with. And so that's kind of the go-to. And um, a lot of that is, oh, let's do a check-in and, maybe join our group call and share your experience. And so what I'm getting in many cases are people who feel that their facilitators are not able to adequately address the difficulty of their own unique experience that they're going through. And so I do get a lot of people who essentially, I get these very desperate emails saying, I don't know who else to turn to. I don't know who else to talk to. Please, can we set up a call sometime soon? But
wow,
it's important to note that's not the majority of people experiencing 5-MeO. That is a minority, but it's a significant minority. And then also keep in mind, even people who would say my experience was super positive, it's what's happening afterwards that's difficult for me, that there's always a potential for that as well. So even it can happen where somebody says like, oh, my experience was amazing, I'm so glad I did it, I was just incredible, 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 and then 5 days later they're waking up in the middle of the night and they feel they're right back in the middle of the experience, and it's freaky and it's terrifying for
yeah,
them,
yeah,
even if the experience was uber positive. So there's just a lot of variables there, and that's why I like to promote this idea again that we need to educate people who are working with 5-MeO, um, because there are people who facilitate that they are not well educated. So when they get someone who has a difficult experience, they say, "Oh, I didn't know that was possible." And I'm like, "Well, then why the fuck are you facilitating? Because this is normal. Like this happens." And then also, it is my professional opinion that most approaches to what is called psychedelic integration in general does not work with 5-MeO DMT. That is just way too unique as a phenomenon and as a molecule. And so that we need specialized educations for facilitators, we need specialized educations for integration guides and coaches, and we
This is
need
so new,
specialized systems
all
for
of it.
people who are working with it in general.
yeah. We need
And
we
it is
need
just coming on the scene. It's like you were one of the first people to really popularize or to really speak about 5-MeO. And now it's taking off in a bigger
Yeah.
way. It's not mainstream in the same way as DMT is, but it's like nowadays I meet people just randomly like that, you know, are, for example, I met people the other day at a birthday party, like, yeah, I'm taking a course with Martin about how to facilitate 5-MeO. And like, wow, like this is definitely spreading, but it's all like we are learning how to navigate this, and we don't know yet how to do it in the best way.
Yeah. It's still under construction,
Yeah,
essentially.
for sure.
under construct. And what perhaps that's a good segue into a logical final question would be what services do you offer, and where can people find you, Martin? I didn't know, for example, that you were that you did courses on how to facilitate ceremonies or
Yeah.
sessions.
Sessions. Yeah. Yeah. I don't do ceremony.
I
He's a
guess.
semantic germaphobe.
Yeah. So, as we mentioned, that I'm an author, so you can find all my books out there in paperback, ebook, and audiobook, wherever you get books, they're out there. And one of my claim to fames is that I've written more about 5-MeO DMT than pretty much the rest of the world combined, I would say. In other words, I've written more about it than really, like, if we had a library of books about 5-MeO DMT, my books would dominate
It would be
because
more
there's more
over
of them.
50%.
Yeah. So that's always available. Then there's my podcast, The Entheogenic Evolution. That's the same name as my YouTube channel. And so there's lots and lots of materials out there for people to educate themselves. And then in terms of what I'm specifically offering, I am always available for 30, 60, or 90-minute calls. And it really varies in the sense that sometimes I'm working with facilitators and they're saying, hey, this is what I do, or this is what happened with a client, and can I get feedback on that? But primarily it's more of people on the client side that they've had these experiences and they need somebody to talk to about it, and they need some advice for how to actually work with the ongoing energetic process. Then through my Patreon page, I do have people who sign up at the two top tiers, either come with a 30-minute monthly call or a 60-minute monthly call. And again, sometimes those are facilitators or people who just want ongoing advice and feedback. And then, yeah, I'm teaching in 2 different classes with Mindscape Psychedelic Institute. That's mindscapeinstitute.org. And for other websites, there's martinball.net or non-dual entheogenic integration.net or .com. What is it? .net or .com? I'm gonna have to look that one up.
It will be in the show notes. No worries.
Okay.
We'll put it in the
So we won't worry about that.
And
And then mindscapeinstitute.org, which is where I am one of the primary instructors in the 5-MeO DMT facilitation course, which is a 5 to 6 month long program. And then I'm also teaching a 5-MeO DMT integration specialist training course where I am working with people who facilitate and offer integration services to educate them around what they need to know to help people with 5-MeO DMT in particular, because again, it is unique that most of what I've seen around, quote, integration for psychedelic therapy and psychedelic work just doesn't apply, does not work with 5-MeO DMT because it's beyond most other psychedelics. So everything we've developed for psilocybin and MDMA and those therapeutic integration approaches, the bottom falls out when we get to 5-MeO DMT because it's just too much more powerful and it's too different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And would you say more fundamentally potent or helpful as well, therefore?
Yeah. That we can spend our entire lives fumbling around in duality and never find clarity. And there's always more to explore. And there's always, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? But 5-MeO brings us to, oh, this is it.
Yeah.
This is it.
If
And
you're
so
really curious.
it's such a rare and unique experience that it's highly, highly valuable because it's very, very hard to find otherwise.
Yeah. That
Awesome.
wow. Thank you, Martin, for coming on. Let's call it quits here for now, but we could go on for much longer, obviously.
Yeah.
But reality kicks in after a journey, and we must
Apparently you-
continue working in our dharma.
You gotta eat, apparently.
Apparently.
Yeah,
It comes with the
food.
program, so
Yeah. Food must happen.
But I wanna take this opportunity to say thank you again. I mean, this has been a huge pleasure, an honor for me. Thank you so much for both of you guys. I feel immensely grateful to have had this experience conversation with you, and very happy to share it with the world and see what the world says. So yeah, so much gratitude. This has been very enlightening, especially obviously because of your wisdom, Martin. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the great questions, the awesome chit chat and banter, and allowing me the opportunity to just run my mouth because I love to do it.
yeah. Sounds good.
We love to get it. We love to receive. Yeah. Thanks so much. Cut.